tomorrow, industry networking event Wednesday, golf tournament Thursday, health and wellness, and art and music all taking place on Sunday. So thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. And just to add on to what Lisa said, any of you that are looking for tickets for events later in the week, as attendees tonight, they are offering discounts out there at the table. These educational networking events are all free, and that's one of the biggest things that's near and dear to our heart in this platform of Boston Cannabis Week, is being able to provide education and networking for free. I've traveled the country to a lot of these types of events, and education should be free, especially here. We're trying to grow, we're trying to grow as a community, and that is our mission moving forward. As Boston Cannabis Week grows, we want to be able to provide educational networking platforms free to all of you. So thank you again for coming. I want to give it to Kara so we can get started.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, guys. I'm really excited to kick off this week's events. So my name is Kara, and I have a strong focus in my career on cannabis education. And in my previous venture, I'm very proud to say that 2 of the panelists up here tonight are graduates of that program. So I am really excited about that. I want to make sure that we're having these conversations that are ready for the industry to have, not necessarily for the public. We need to be talking about these things at our mutual level of understanding. So I'm really excited to have these kinds of conversations that are more in-depth and real experts on the subject. So also, where'd Scott go? Oh. Hold on. Where's asking where the thing is?
Where's the thing?
Here he comes.
Does he got the thing?
Today's Asia's birthday.
Yay! Oh, you tricky person.
Thank you. I love it.
All right, so I will let you tell everyone about yourself and enjoy the panel, everybody.
All right, can everyone hear me? You cannot? No, you good? Now, so this is going to be a discussion, like a conversation amongst friends. So if anyone that's feeling friendly would like to move forward so that we feel a little bit more like a group. Who's brave? Who doesn't mind standing up in front of the public? I love it. Look at that bravery. Come closer. That way we'll feel like we're a little bit more connected in this conversation. Cannabis is a communal plant. We connect, we vibe, we chill.
Word. But I feel like your mic's not on.
It's not on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I think I could just.
Yeah, I think it's on.
You can hear it? Okay.
Okay. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Asia Atwood. I'm the CEO and one of 2 co-founders of Trella Technologies. We developed a device that trains tall plants to grow sideways so that you can fit them in short spaces. It's all about trying to figure out how to make the most out of one plant. And I'm a cannabis patient, an engineer. That's the reason why I got into more of the tech side of the industry. And I love this plant. I love this community. I've known several of the people on this panel for several years. They have a wealth of knowledge. Every time I have conversations with each of them, I come away learning something that I did not know before, and I've been following cannabis for about 5 to 6 years. So they are people that deal with this all day, every day, probably dream cannabis. So this is a great opportunity for us to learn from some very, very, well-educated experts in the field. So please, feel free to ask questions. We're going to leave about 15 minutes at the end for people to ask questions, and we're going to take it from there. So I'm going to let each of you please introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Biener, and I'm the president and co-founder of the Healing Rose Company. We're based in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and we handcraft organic CBD body care products using 100% certified organic carrier oils, essential oils, butters, waxes, and herbs. And we also use full spectrum CBD oil. We are under the Massachusetts Hemp Program, and I also co-founded the Massachusetts Hemp Coalition. And I am a basketball coach for both high school and middle school girls. And I also am on the board of directors for Elevate Northeast, and also NOSHA, which is the Northeast Sustainable Hemp Association.
Nice.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Livingood. I work for a company called Pax Labs. We're based in San Francisco and we make vaporizers for cannabis.
Okay, I got
Oh, sorry.
one. Be juggling. Hi, my name is Kebra Smith Bolden. I'm the CEO and founder of Canna Health. We do medical cannabis certifications throughout Connecticut and are looking at moving nationally, so we let people use our brand to open up, and it's been a beautiful thing. And one of my licensees is here, and my Canna friends. So, but in addition, I'm the president of Connecticut United for Reform and Equity. We are responsible for having the first ever equity language added into proposed cannabis legalization bills that were presented in the state of Connecticut last year. And we are continuing those conversations and educating the community. I am a founding member of Elevate New England, so it's always a pleasure to be here. As Kara alluded, I'm one of the graduates of Northeast Institute of Cannabis with Laura, and you know, she was an excellent role model and leader and wrote great curriculum. And without her, I wouldn't have even started my career. So, you know, I owe a lot to her. But, you know, I'm affiliated with some organizations, primarily those that work towards fighting for equity and opportunity for all people, the right to grow. These are all things that we should have, and in Connecticut we don't yet. So we look to Massachusetts to be leaders, and we thank you for all the work that you've done and the groundwork that you've laid for us. Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
I started it.
Hi, my name is Sohan Shen. I'm the Business Development Manager at MCR Labs, so Massachusetts Cannabis Research. We're a cannabis testing and research facility located in Framingham, Mass, so it's about a half hour west of here. Working with any adults here in the state who want to find more information about their cannabis products. So don't necessarily have to be a licensee while we do work with most of the dispensaries as well. And yeah, I'm more used to seeing some of these ladies on the panel sitting where you guys are, so privileged to be part of this.
All right, thank you, everyone. So let's start with the topic of hemp. We're going to go there first. I recall, you know, getting into cannabis, and then you found out that hemp had a little bit of, you know, traction going. So I decided to learn about hemp. And there's just so much information out there, and then the laws are constantly changing. So, Laura, can you please give us kind of your take on the possibilities with hemp, and maybe a little bit of the history that's gotten us to where we are today?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So, you know, hemp's been used for thousands and thousands of years, and it used to be in our food chain and our food supply. You know, all the cows and all of our livestock fed off hemp, so CBD was naturally in our food supply. So it's not something that's new. It was just something that was, you know, taken away from us for decades and decades, unfortunately. So I think a lot of focus is on CBD because it's profitable. It's able to help with so many different things. But obviously there's fiber, there's food. I know a lot of people are growing for hemp seed. There's hemp seed oil. So there's a lot of potential. But when we look locally to here in Massachusetts, land is very expensive to grow on. We can't grow all year round like out west and in the middle of the country. So I really see the focus here being on CBD. And unfortunately right now the regulations have it so that we can't put it in food and we can't sell hemp flower. So it's an interesting time right now, but I definitely see that changing. We're waiting for federal regulations to be passed down. So it's kind of a waiting game right now. And there's a lot of, you know, unsure producers, farmers that are in a lot of state of anxiety here locally. But, you know, I really do have a positive outlook on that, and I see the industry being able to open up. Right now, being able to only source Massachusetts hemp for producers is really, really crippling to the industry locally. If we can start opening it up, which I believe that's going to start happening hopefully by the end of the year, we can start really focusing on like a New England market. And I think that's really how we'll survive in terms of national competition. If we can focus on the quality, the love and care that's put into, especially, you know, Vermont, Maine, obviously here in Mass, we have amazing farmers that have organic certifications that have been growing for over 100 years as a family. So if we can really focus on opening up those laws and allowing all the CBD products, the whole range of them, to be made and produced here, I think it would allow us to survive. But again, there's a lot of unknown, and the current regulations are pretty restrictive, unfortunately, for businesses.
Thank you. So to follow up on that, just for individuals who may not know the difference between hemp, and cannabis, which is technically there isn't, but for those who don't know how it's qualified legally, can you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah. So, hemp that's grown for CBD is going to look a lot like cannabis that's grown for THC. The only difference is that the flower out of the ground has to be below 0.3% THC. There also are hemp, cultivars that are grown for fiber too. So, if you're growing for CBD, you're not going to be growing the same type of hemp that you are going to be growing for fiber or seeds. And that's a huge thing because a lot of farmers started at the beginning of the season here in Massachusetts growing for CBD, growing those high, rich CBD strains, that they're taking a risk that could go out of the ground at like 0.4% THC. And if it tests at that 3 times, you have to destroy that crop. So like these farmers are taking huge risks buying seeds from, the state government doesn't provide these seeds. So they're taking huge risks by buying into genetics, plant seed in the ground, spending all their resources, their time, their labor, their love, their energy, with the hopes that it comes out of the ground below 0.3. And now they're not able to sell that flower, and they're not able to sell anything that you're ingesting. So sorry to go off on that again, but it's just really frustrating.
No. That's understandable. And you talked about testing.
Yeah.
You have to get hemp tested to prove that it's below 0.3. So if you're growing a hemp plant in your home and you think it's hemp because someone told you it's hemp, and you've got 15 of them, you have 15 cannabis plants. You don't have 15 hemp plants. Is that correct?
Correct. And if you are not under the Massachusetts hemp program, that's an illegal grow. So if you had 12 plants that were THC-rich strains, it's legal. Technically, if they're hemp, even if you're growing 1, it's not legal unless you're a certified grower under the program. It's pretty silly. Yeah.
So let's stay in alignment with testing. Sohan, I've seen on the market home testing kits. Are they legit?
That's a good question.
So I'm not going to speak like for or against. I see one of our clients here that's kind of tested. Right now options range from, you can get one from a few $100s to tens of thousands of dollars. What I will say is, depending on the intended purpose, you can get some useful information. Like for potency, one example would be kind of if you have a grow, determining when chemical ratios are kind of optimal for harvest. That could be a good preliminary indicator. But as far as replicating some of the purity testing we get into, that would be quite a challenge to achieve the levels of detection kind of we get at the lab. They don't make us go through all the audits for nothing. So if it depends on the use. So I would say if it works for you, or if you have something that you want to validate, we're happy to kind of cross compare. But yeah.
So to follow up on that, you were talking about testing for purification, and then you also mentioned that there are like a price range for those home testing kits. So are the more expensive ones the ones that can possibly test for the purifications, or is that definitely something that you need to send to a lab to have done?
So right now, I don't really have the firmest grasp on like the technology out there. Everything's expanding pretty rapidly at the moment. Most of the handhelds and portables are focused on potency analysis. So that's just one aspect of the testing we do, potency and purity. So for certain select cases, it might be good, but yeah, I would say case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. And then, Kiba, let's jump back to CBD for a moment. We were talking about cannabinoids and testing and hemp, but I know from my family, they live in Pennsylvania, so that's a state that's way behind where we are right now. And my mom is on the CBD craze. Her, all of her friends, they all think that it's supposed to be something that will heal everything. You send them something to try, it doesn't work, and they tell me, CBD doesn't work. What are they missing?
That's about it. No, but there is this There's a couple of things happening with CBD right now that I don't necessarily like. And that is acting as if CBD is somehow better than any of the other cannabinoids. And we all know that, well, I don't know if we all know. Do we all know that cannabinoids work best together? Yeah. And okay, so we all know that cannabinoids work best together. And the consumption of cannabis from CBD to any of the cannabinoids is individualized. So you never know exactly what's gonna work, how it's gonna work for you as an individual. And so there are trial and errors. So people who think they're gonna take a tincture and then tomorrow be healed miraculously, this is not even something that we should be discussing. Number one, we shouldn't be promising any effects because again, I just said that it's extremely individualized. And then we also should be careful about what our expectations are and what expectations we're given to patients. So CBD is great, but all of the cannabinoids are listed in the United States patent that says that cannabinoids are good and they are neuroprotectors and they are anti-inflammatories. So, it's better when they're all working together. And I'm sorry for this craze, but things need, you have to make sure you're getting CBD products from a reliable source. Like when I'm ready to take a nice bath and some bath salts, I'm looking for my Healing Rose jar because I know that they were made right and that they were made with care and there was, what is that topic? Conscious, entrepreneurship at least. And so, those things are really important. So you got to know where things are sourced from, and all of these things equal your experience. Mm-hmm. So if you receive bad products that haven't been tested and that aren't really CBD, but someone's claiming it, then CBD is terrible, it doesn't work, and that's the way people will look at it. But you have to make sure you know where it's coming from. You have to be able to see the sources, and then you have to be willing to have a little trial and error while you find what's best for you.
Is everyone hearing okay? Can you check your mic?
Oh, it's probably not even on.
Oh.
Try that. Ta-da! Now I can't say that over again. CBD, get it tested, know that there's trial and error, get some bath salts for the Healing Rose, and all that. And entourage effect is dope. You need it all to work together.
Thank you.
Trust but verify.
So it takes patience, it seems like, and education.
Yes.
So Lauren, I want to get you into this. If you could talk a little bit about education, like what resources are there possibly out there for people that are new to the market, they don't have a lot of experience, we want to make sure that they have a positive experience on their first round. Mm-hmm. What should they do?
Yeah, so I think the first is to sort of figure out what you don't know, especially with new consumers. There's so much information floating around. There's so many brands. There's so many retailers right now. And it's super important for people to kind of like do your homework, especially when it's something that you're putting into your body. I think that, resources that, have been around and have some credibility. Leafly is a great place to look. Weed Maps is a good place to look. But really just getting smart about what it is you know and what it is you don't know, and trying to go to credible sources for that. I also think we're in a moment of time where it's really, the brands that are in the business now, PAX included, we really have a responsibility to consumers in the industry's nascency to provide them with the right information and to have some integrity behind a lot of that stuff. So I think it's defining what you don't know and going to the right places to find it, and then also stepping up as stewards of this industry and making good calls to kind of protect the future of it.
Thank you. And we've all probably heard a little bit of the news about vape pens and some of the issues we're having with that. And I remember in Providence just a couple of days ago, I was sitting at a table and there was a store across the way that had a huge awning that said CBD across it. And I was thinking to myself, I wonder if they had that awning that said CBD across it like 3 months ago. Probably not. So they're new to it and they don't have a lot of experience and education within that store. But I wanted to just kind of open it up to the panel. What's going on with the vape pens and the illnesses that we're seeing in some of the deaths? Can you guys talk to that? Anyone has a chance to do so?
I'll step in. I work for a vaporizer company. To be clear, what's happening right now is awful. It's terrible, and it's also preventable. I think that it definitely very clearly highlights the need for federal deschedulization of cannabis and for the federal government to get smart and get educated and start creating standards for health and safety that can be applied nationally. Thanks. I think right now, what consumers can do, there's so much that we know and there's so much that we don't know about what's going on. We're hearing reports of vitamin E acetate, we're hearing reports of illicit manufacturing in people's basements. It's also becoming more and more clear as incidents like these happen that lack of access to legal cannabis leads to consumption of illicit cannabis. Or poorly processed manufactured cannabis. So, until we figure out what's actually going on, I think it's safe to say that consumers need to be vigilant in what types of products they're buying. Retail locations, dispensaries need to be vigilant about who they're buying from, and contact your every state that is recreational legal has a state board of cannabis. Contact them for information about where cannabis is coming from, if a brand is legit, if it's passing health and safety tests. All of that stuff is in place for legal states, and we need to be vigilant about what we're consuming.
Anyone else?
She covered it.
All right, I'll prime the pump a little bit. So some of the stuff that I've been reading talks about flavoring and how there are additives like cinnamon and things like that that might be part of it. So I don't know if you can speak to this, things that are added to, the mix. How does that affect, the chances of something, I guess, reacting incorrectly when you heat it up?
Yep.
Is that, because that's the issue too, is it could be okay, but once you put the temperature to it, that's a different story.
Sure. So right now, to that point earlier, we are developing a vitamin E acetate test, and I know Scott's on the last panel tonight. He can probably speak to that more, but that'll be rolling out shortly. As far as other additives, it's tough to kind of do case by case. We generally, design the testing around Massachusetts state regs and what they require us to adhere to, and kind of minimize the cost being passed on to the consumer that way. With all these, recent, it's definitely worth expanding that. Right now, our complementary testing covers potency and purity, and we're constantly working to, update both those methods and also, take into account new market forces like stuff that's happening now that's relevant.
Great, thank you. So we talked about, the fact that if this was federally legal and we had, great testing standards, federal regulations, a lot of this would be minimized. So what do you guys think are the biggest barriers that the market's facing in regards to becoming federally legal?
Speak to that a little. So right now, the lack of federal funding, that's a big one. So essentially, we're kind of all just conducting like stage 3 clinical trials on ourselves that are just going, unrecorded. But yeah, I forgot where. But beyond that, kind of just the onus is on us to educate ourselves.
Yeah, I'd say lack of research, I think, is why things haven't moved at the national level. I think a lot of Congress is still very afraid of it. But as states are legalizing, medical, I don't know how many states have medical right now, but it's a significant number. So I think it's just getting the legislation changed at the federal level is such a huge undertaking. The lack of access to banking is a huge problem. In the CBD space, it's getting a little bit easier, but I know on the cannabis side of things, I don't personally deal with that, but I hear it's a nightmare. I think at one of the banks, it's like at least $5,000 or $10,000 a month just to have a bank account if you touch the plant. So I think just allowing those barriers to be moved would allow us to grow nationally. Yeah.
I also want to add, having things like this and giving folks the opportunity to have these conversations and opening, having something like Boston Cannabis Week where we're not just celebrating cannabis, we're actually talking about it and having tough conversations and new conversations and interesting things to talk about, I think is also, I think it's really cool, and I think it's getting us closer. And I think I also think it's quite responsible. Yeah, so I'd encourage that if you're not from Massachusetts, going back to your own home states or counties or cities and offering up these types of opportunities for people to talk about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it definitely comes down to education and the wills and the votes of the people. So if you can get the legislators to understand that people are caring about this issue, and then that creates change. So I think we're in there. It's like happening. I don't know how long until it happens nationally, but I know it's on the horizon. I just don't know how far away.
Oh, I was just going to agree that I think hand in hand are banking and then, of course, equity issues and the federal government's role in providing some sort of reparative justice for the prohibition of cannabis, and that has to happen, and states should have control over how they implement or what equity programs they put in place, but the federal government should provide guidelines and oversee that process to make sure it's truly fair and equitable.
All right, time check. I know we started on different times. Just wanted.
It's 6:50.
How much time do we have left?
About another 25 minutes.
Okay, great. I'd like to talk about consumption methods. Different ways to consume, lots of them. What do you guys think are the best methods? And then can you also tell me what your preferred method is personally?
I'll start out. I love cannabis. I've been a medical patient for about 7 years. I was always a real flower person. Edibles, personally, it does turn into a different molecule in your body, and it just hits me really hard, so I can't consume edibles regularly. And as I became a heavy flower consumer, it starts to become harsh on your lungs. So I've switched to using hash rosin and like a dab format, I guess. I don't know how to, dabbing apparatus. And I think that's honestly like the healthiest way to consume. I can do it at a really low temperature. My setup's come a long way since college. You do like really low temperatures. You have like an insert now, and it's just like, it's intimidating for, I think, a first-time consumer. But if you love cannabis and you've been consuming for a while, if you don't like the feeling of smoking on your lungs, I think switching to a solventless concentrate is huge. I haven't smoked a solvent dab in like 3 years. I think there's a lot of risks associated with that we don't understand yet, smoking small amounts of butane over and over again. So I can definitely, I'm all for solventless hash rosin and solventless flower rosins. I think that's the way to go.
I can attest to her setup too.
Well, again, I work for vaporizer companies, so I'm going to say I prefer using packs. But I also, to what Kibra was saying earlier, like we all have these different endocannabinoid systems, and a lot of it is trial and error and figuring out not only just like what type of cannabis works for you, but like the actual methodology of how you're consuming. Been diving into a little edibles game lately and enjoying it a lot. And I think the reason why I enjoy it so much is that there is like, oddly enough, for edibles, which I feel like was the least predictable experience maybe 10 years ago, I feel like now they're almost one of the most predictable experiences. It's very clear what you're getting. So I'm on the edibles train for now, but yeah.
Okay, so I like everything. I think it always. But I guess my favorite, I'm from New Haven. I'm like a hood girl. I like blunts. All day.
Not the healthiest way.
It's not the healthiest
Not
way.
nice.
That is not being a conscious consumer. That's what I like to do. And nobody will tell me to change. But I do, it depends on who. So we have cannabis clinics, so people come in and ask me that specifically, what should I do? How should I do it? And again, it's totally based on the individual. I would be a little cautious of, a 90-year-old woman doing a dab, for the first time, or whatever, for her arthritis. Like, I'm gonna do a dab for my arthritis. So instead, I would say, let's start with the topical and see if that works. And then we can ease you into, something more. But it really depends on the individual. But yeah, I like big blunts, and I cannot lie.
somewhere. And they are on the money.
Nice. I'm with Kibra, equal opportunity indulger. No child left behind, right? Lately, pendulum's been swinging more towards concentrates, extracts, solventless. But in terms of, that's just me personally. In terms of the lab, our stance, we're just providing information, showing you what's there. Like the science is the science, what you guys do is up to you. So kind of, you know your body the best, work with your healthcare providers. Yeah, just be open.
Well, like if you have asthma, let's just say. Now, cannabis is, when you consume cannabis, it can work as a vasodilator and open up and get your breathing better, but you might not want to introduce smoke at the same time. So you might want an alternate form. So in Connecticut, we have capsules, we have, do you have patches here?
Yeah.
Too. You have we don't have patches, but we have edibles that we have in our dispensary. So there's a lot of different ways. You have to be smart about it and just make sure that you're not exacerbating any other conditions, or you just really. This is your one opportunity. The pharmaceutical industry has never said, "What would you like to do? How would you like to do it?" Now you got to take that pill twice a day, that many milligrams, and that's that. So this is an opportunity for patients to really be autonomous and decide how they want to feel, when they want to feel that way, how, what environment they want to be in, like all these things that you don't necessarily have in any other ways to medicate. So, enjoy that and take advantage of that autonomy.
Totally have to throw out there, obviously you can use topicals, which is what my company makes.
Topicals.
You said a patch, right? Oh, yeah.
The old lady can rub it on.
She wants to make it clear.
Make it clear. There's a lot of different topicals, and that might be the safest way for a lot of people to consume, since it's not going to get into your bloodstream. And also wanted to add, if you are someone who likes to use a vape pen, you can still load in solventless concentrates into certain pens and vape it that way. So it's not like you have to do a dab setup. You can still use concentrates in other ways as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, I guess I'll share my own. I forgot.
Please.
So for me, flour and a little bit of vaporizer, but I will do edibles. I'll do an oil at night. For me, I need that to help me get through the entire night. If I just do a vaporizer before I go to bed, I'll wake up in the middle of the night. And I believe that's just the effect of how it lasts in your bloodstream longer with an edible. It really gets me through the entire night versus just the first 2 to 3 hours with a vape pen. But I do enjoy a blunt, especially with
so we should expand upon that a little bit and say then it's also based on what you're medicating or what it is you're trying to accomplish, because if you smoke cannabis, you have maybe 30 minutes to an hour where you actually having that effect, but if you consume it and digest it, you have a different effect and different amount of time that you're feeling that. And so like Asia said, at night, her oils help her sleep. And so that is something that also you have to consider when you're choosing your delivery method.
Yep, great, thank you. All right, I want to open it up for questions from the audience. I'm going to walk around, raise your hand, I'll pass you the mic. All right. Is there a preferred route that you would like me to take from a production standpoint? Here we go.
I know all the stuff.
Thank you. Thank you for your commitment and passion about this industry. So you each have a unique perspective in the way you're involved through business and the organizations that you're in. What do you see as the biggest risk to businesses that they're not adequately addressing, that can damage their brand, damage their value, and also continue to create negative stories for the industry? Because I love what Lauren said about being stewards, right? We're stewardships for long-term development and growth of this industry. So curious, what's the biggest risk that's not being adequately addressed by businesses right now?
I can start. I think it's bad players. I think it's folks, even in legal states, you've got dispensaries, unlicensed dispensaries popping up, getting shut down, reopening 2 blocks away, popping up, getting shut down, doing the same thing over and over and over. So I think it's bad players on the distribution side, it's bad players on the manufacturing side, and on the retail side. And again, that's why I think it's super important, as you were saying, to be good stewards, especially right now when the industry is just getting its legs. It's more important than ever to make sure that we're doing things with integrity and we're making the right decisions, because it's not just about PAX and it's not just about Lauren. It is literally about the future of this industry.
I'd say on the hemp side of things, people making crazy claims, cutting corners on lab testing is really making a bad name for the CBD industry right now. And it's incredibly frustrating to me as a producer who uses a full spectrum oil that we spend like close to $600 doing full lab testing on, and then we do end testing on our products, and that's not something that was required previously, but under the Massachusetts hemp program it is. And there's just so many bad players in this space that aren't doing that strict lab testing, that are making claims. I mean, I saw a CBD soda company once that had a outline of human bodies, and it just pointing different parts of male and females, like, oh, it helps with breast cancer, our CBD soda. Yes, it can help with prostate cancer. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what you want. You want isolate in a soda with a sugary drink. That's exactly what you should be telling people. Wow. So that's always really frustrated me. So I'm glad to see that that's coming to light and people are having to be smarter about it, because I've been strict to my morals and my ethics and how we do our production. So I'm glad to see that's coming too. I think that's a good risk. But on the cannabis side of things, I can't speak to as much. But yeah.
You may need to get that aging CBD water or something.
The fountain of youth.
Yeah, don't spend $4 a bottle on that one, no. Or more.
Okay. Yeah. Get it close to you.
Hey.
There you go. Hi.
So continuing with that, I would like you to tell everybody that's here about the campaign that you have to talk to our state legislatures about some of the things that are happening that we can have a direct effect on.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now in the House, we're waiting for a hearing of the Joint Committee on Cannabis for House Bill 4001. And I'd love if you guys could write a little note down to yourself. If you go to the Massachusetts Hemp Coalition Facebook page, we have a link that makes it super easy to send a note to your legislators. In that, you can customize it, or you can just do the one that's pre-written. But right now, we haven't had a scheduled hearing on it, so all those hemp farmers and producers right now are in limbo in terms of what's going on. So we just need to ask for a hearing. So again, if you can go to the Massachusetts Hemp Coalition Facebook page or NOSHA's Facebook page, and you can click on a link to write to your legislators, and that would just be really powerful. We've had about 80 letters sent in the past few days, but we'd love to get that number up into the triple digits and beyond. So thank you for asking that. I appreciate it.
So taking the talk about being good stewards and being responsible in a different direction, how does a company like PAX choose its processing partners to ensure that kind of safety?
Yeah. So all of our PAX, right now, we're a hardware and software company. We make vaporizers. We also make the cartridges that are filled with oil, and then we also have an app platform. So we work with over 60 brand partners. That's who these are the extract companies that actually fill our pods with oil. All of them are hand selected. All of them follow their respective state health and safety protocols. All of the oil that goes into every single one of our pods goes through those safety testings. And all of our pods, the ingredients are listed on the back. We have never cut corners when it comes to what types of brand partners that we work with. There are probably thousands of extractors now nationally, and we work with just around 60. So it's super important to us to only work with other folks in the business who are have the same standards that we do when it comes to product quality and safety.
Thank you. Oh, here we go. Am I standing for the cameras, maybe? Thank you. There you go.
The level of knowledge and passion here and eloquence is really inspiring. Thank you. It's moving. I'm curious what brought you into this industry. I'd love to hear your personal stories.
Oh, sure. So I'll start. I first tried cannabis when I was about to go into college, and I fell in love immediately. 2013, I went to the High Times Cup in Denver, realized there was an industry, and set my sights on that. So I went to Northeastern University, got my business degree. In my last 2 years there, I focused on being a cannabis entrepreneur. So I took all of my classes, always tried to apply like the cannabis market to everything, and knew that this was my place. I didn't know what my place was, so I joined a women's networking group that was formerly Women Grow Boston, now is Elevate Northeast, and I kind of found my tribe. And then through a dislocated kneecap injury, I started the company. So I had a saw from someone else, tried it out, and it was that light bulb moment, and I just sprinted in that direction, and I haven't stopped sprinting for like 3 years. Yeah.
So my journey is a little less organic, but previous to working at PAX, I started working at PAX 7 years ago. Nobody even really knew what a vape pen was in 2013. But prior to that, I worked for elected officials in the government. And I remember just being, I actually found out about the job at PAX through a recruiter. So I wasn't looking to work in cannabis, wasn't even sure that it was kind of a very strange phone call that when my recruiter asked if I was interested. But the more that I dug into the space, the more curious I was about how a $6 billion industry was operating without any federal oversight and really no rules. That was fascinating to me. There's no other industry in the United States or probably in the world that's going on with. But what really made me fall in love with working in cannabis was after, in 2013, I got to do my first focus groups with cannabis consumers. It's probably a lot similar to a lot of folks like you in the room, and I just fell in love. And it became very obvious that this was something that people hold near and dear to their hearts. They've been using it, we call them high frequency consumers, but they've been using it for a long time and they use it a lot. And it's super important to their daily lives. And after talking with real people, that it was so integral to how they lived every day, you just want to help, and you just want to do the right thing and make it all real for everyone and make it easy and accessible and legal. So that was my journey.
Okay, so I didn't tell y'all, I'm a registered nurse. So I worked in home care primarily for over a decade. And so I was in behavioral health. So I was basically medicating people 2 times a day and never really seeing improvements. A lot of times, a lot of people had exacerbations of all of their illnesses, whether it was physical, mental, social. And I was an inner city nurse. And so it just was getting routine. And my grandmother ended up having an aneurysm. And this was an 88-year-old woman who was vibrant, alive. Every time I tell the story, I gotta throw in, had a boyfriend, driving her car, still driving. And she suffered an aneurysm. It devastated her mind, her body, and she was unable to walk, unable to effectively communicate. She wasn't eating, she wasn't sleeping, she was falling all the time, and she ended up coming to live with me to continue her recovery. And about a month in, she wasn't participating in physical therapy, and I knew the routine. If you don't actually show any progress, then they'll discontinue your services, especially under Medicare. And so I was just despondent because it was a lot. There was a lot going on, and I was praying, and I say this every time too, God is in the cannabis business, because as I'm praying, I very distinctly got a vision of my grandmother telling me, like 10 years before, I have to smoke a joint and take a bath every day because she had severe arthritis throughout her body. So this poor woman was in pain. That's why she wasn't participating in physical therapy, and she wasn't able to respond to, Tylenol and all those things. And cannabis was the thing that worked for her. So I ended up getting her medicated with cannabis. Her caregiver was a consumer, so they did their thing in the morning. And within a month, my grandmother was walking with the walker, she was eating, she was engaging with the family, she was able to communicate. She was knew her boyfriend and, you know, was welcoming him. Like, it was just a beautiful thing to see the transformation, and because it had happened so quickly and so effectively, I wanted to learn more about cannabis, and that's when I started Googling schools and came out here to take classes at Northeast Institute of Cannabis, and from there got connected to Women Grow and met my first mentor outside of school in Beth, and then that became Elevate New England, and we stayed connected and just started bringing that information back to my home state and developed into the cannabis clinics, and it's just been a really interesting ride. I will say that business is definitely a part of my journey, but my real passion and my real interest is in advocacy and making sure that we repair the wrongs that have happened to communities that were over-policed, that were affected, devastated, destroyed by the war on drugs. And I just feel like, and I got that from coming up here to school. That was like my first introduction to the correlation between the prohibition of cannabis and the destruction of communities and lives. And so I work diligently to talk about PTSD and urban trauma and make sure we provide services and access to communities that don't normally have access to safe plant-based medications. And, you know, and protect people who are on probation and parole, and, you know, get them in and really get them to understand why they're in the state that they're in. Most people are dealing with traumas, and their lives are just not able to correct themselves because they have all these inner scars and they're dealing with all these things on a regular basis. And so when we get them into the clinic and we're able to diagnose them with PTSD and help them understand that they're trauma victims and they can go to the next level and be therapy and really begin to heal, then we can start improving our communities, and then we'll have people who are actually able to access all these programs that we're fighting for, because they'll be able to be well and focused. So that's how I got into this.
Wow. How to follow that up? Okay, so my journey started simply enough. Just found out I was passionate about partaking. Went to school, studied business and chemistry, and applied it in a more traditional way. Did that through a few jobs, and then wanted to find something that I was more passionate about. So I found myself working for the lab, and here, we're in a very lucky position where we get to see a lot of people how cannabis helps, and I'm just all about sharing the love of cannabis and how it can help improve people's lives in whatever way. Whether it's, we have people like grandfathers coming in a grandfather making, a tincture for his epileptic granddaughter, husband making RSO for his wife's breast cancer. So just getting to help, in journeys like that.
All right, well, thank you very much. Panelists, everyone please give them a round of applause. Sorry we ran out of time. Kara's cutting it.
That was really incredible. Your breadth of knowledge is fantastic. Can we get a hip hip hooray?
Oh,
hip
thank you, everyone.
Happy birthday. Now I'm a slightly more prepared human. I want to thank Elevate, MCR Labs, Greenline Cannabis, and Adaptive HR for sponsoring and helping put on this event today. I also want you guys all to be aware that we have representatives from National Expungement Week here who we've partnered with. They will have a space at all of our events throughout the week. You'll be able to donate and participate, and however you can assist. Then I won't go through all these. We have events all week long. Here in Boston, then there's Shoujo on Wednesday, which I think the next two actually sold out, but hey, I get to brag. Go Lisa, go Scott. And then Thursday, there's the Merrimack Golf Course. We are having a golf tournament, the BCW Classic.
And you get to drive the golf cart.
I get to drive a golf cart and drink bellinis all day.
Drinking and driving.
And on Sunday, we'll be in Boston at the AC Marriott Albany Street in the morning, then across the street at the Underground Ink Block for Experience Wellness and Experience Boston. And Lupe Fiasco is going to be there. Kind of cool. And then I also want to shout out that on Saturday, if you're in town, hit the Common. It's kind of a party. Boston Freedom Rally this weekend. It's going to be really good too. So, thanks guys. We have our next panel coming up shortly.
Okay.
No? The other way.
Wanna go?
Yeah, there we go. Coming up next, so we'll start that in about 10 or so minutes. So go get a drink, relax, smoke quickly, and we'll be right back. All right.
Make it quick. Don't go anywhere. I want to do a photo real quick. Group photo.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're thinking.
All right. Can we do a group photo real quick?
I should make everybody move now.
Great, thanks guys for coming back and excited for this next discussion. I kind of rambled on at the end of the last one, so I'm not going to do that on this one. Chanel Lindsay of Orange Cannabis, lawyer, activist, helps draft laws here in Massachusetts. I'm going to let her introduce herself. She'll do so much better than me. And thank you guys. Enjoy the panel.
Hey everyone. So welcome back everybody. Really excited to continue this amazing evening with the discussion on social equity. And as you may know, this topic has taken center stage not only here in Massachusetts, but around the country. And so when we're talking about social equity, what we mean is acknowledging the history of this cannabis industry. So that means the generations of harm inflicted on our communities, and that means Black and brown communities, poor communities, and understanding the direct correlation between that harm and the current value that cannabis has as a now legal substance. Not only the value that it has day to day, but as a tool to build wealth. And this is one of the most significant opportunities in our lifetimes to build wealth. And so we know that it's even that much more important to pay attention to this as these two interrelated and very important issues converge. So increasingly here in Massachusetts and around the country, social equity means fighting back against the forces that would have cannabis go the natural path of capitalism. And that would mean that it would end up in the hands of the select majority, with its rewards excluding all others, including small businesses, and further marginalizing those communities that have been targeted under prohibition. So as we get started, I'll quickly introduce myself, and I'll let our esteemed panel do the same. And really, tonight we're in for a treat here, because we're hearing from people who are at the forefront of all of these different and very nuanced pieces of the equity puzzle. So for me, my name is Chanel Lindsay. I'm founder of a company called Ardent Cannabis. And I've been using cannabis as a medicine for over 18 years now. And in 2015, I developed this technology, this cute little guy here. As cute as she is, she packs a punch. People can take their cannabis, put it inside, and make any cannabis product that you could think of. And so I've grown this idea from a very tiny dream to a global brand, and in the process I got a firsthand look at the challenges of growing a cannabis business, especially as a person of color. I'm also an attorney. I'm one of the authors of Question 4 that legalized cannabis here in Massachusetts, and along with Shalene Title, drafted and fought to include the initial equity language in the ballot initiative. And after that was passed, we founded Equitable Opportunities Now. That is a nonprofit working to fight and protect and to grow these equity provisions. Back in 2017, I was appointed by the treasurer to the advisory board, where I work in an official capacity to create recommendations for the commission to grow this robust and healthy industry and make it one that's really inclusive for all of us, and that one which all of the citizens of Massachusetts can participate. Sorry about that. And it has been, over these last couple of years, really amazing to see these ideas develop into regulations and now move towards implementation. And tonight, as you hear from this group, it will give you a real insight to where things stand, what's actually happening, how what we all fought for is becoming a reality, and what challenges still exist. So now I will pass it on to my panelists to introduce themselves.
I think I'm the only one without a mic.
That's okay.
Hi, my name is Niabi McIntosh. I am the daughter of reggae legend Peter Tosh. I am the executive of his brand and estate. If you don't know who Peter Tosh is, he was one of the founding members of the Wailers, went on to have a solo career, and wrote the iconic song Legalize It, Equal Rights and Justice, Apartheid. And not only do I run his estate and brand, but I also am founder of his nonprofit, as well as president of PT Capital, an entity that is launched with the efforts to take the brand, the Peter Tosh brand, into the cannabis industry. I've also launched an initiative under the foundation called Justice for Jawara. A couple years ago, my brother was incarcerated for cannabis possession, and after being incarcerated for only a month, was brutally attacked by another inmate and suffered a traumatic brain injury. So I do some advocacy around that as well in prison justice reform and sharing Joara's story to let people really understand the harms of the war on drugs.
Hi, everyone can hear me okay? So my name's Caroline Frankel. I consider myself a first-generation Massachusetts recreational cannapreneur. I am a 20-year enthusiast myself, and I believe people should have the choice to use it for medicine, but also for recreation, right? So I own Caroline's Cannabis in Uxbridge, Massachusetts. I am the first woman-owned and operated mom and pop shop here in the state. And I'm also the first general applicant to attain a license as well, so very exciting.
Good evening. My name is Shalene Title. I'm an activist and a lawyer, and I currently serve in the social justice seat of the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, which is the agency that is tasked with implementing legal and medical marijuana here in the Commonwealth.
Hi, my name is Kobe Evans. I am one of the co-founders, co-owners of Pure Oasis. We are the first economic empowerment applicant to receive a provisional license. To receive a provisional license for a recreational dispensary in Boston, lifelong Boston resident. As of late, I guess I've been becoming more of an activist along the lines of making sure that equity prevails in Massachusetts and also in other places across the country. It's beyond important that there is a balanced approach to deploying recreational cannabis across the country so that people who've been locked up aren't locked out. So I think that, you know, within this conversation, a lot of times that it happens at such high levels that there aren't people in the room that advocate for everyone. So it's important that we advocate from the bottom up to make sure that when cannabis does become legal in different states, that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate in this growing industry. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as you can see, we have some superstars up here, and I know we're going to be able to get into a very deep, nuanced discussion. And to get started, Shalene, there have been a lot of different movements this week or in the last month or so. Could you just briefly give everybody kind of an update as to where equity stands right now, especially when it comes to the newest votes by the Commission?
Sure. So last week, the Commission met and made a series of decisions on the latest regulations, which will be finalized by the end of the month. And if you want to read them, go to masscannabiscontrol.com, click on Documents, and then Public Meeting Packets. And you can find all of the regulations that we discussed, and you can search for any of the terms that you're interested in. But as a very brief recap, and let me say in terms of timing, it feels like the stuff we talk about at the meetings is so far ahead of what is happening on the ground, and I understand that. But it feels like when we had our first meeting back in 2017, I was like dreaming of the day when I would be sitting between the first general applicant, woman-owned micro-business, and the first provisional license to be issued in Boston, a minority-owned economic empowerment applicant. That's very, very exciting, and I think we'll see that pattern continue. But I realize that what I'm talking about now is going to take a long time to be implemented. So let me set that expectation. So you may recall that we have been discussing social consumption and delivery licenses. These are generally considered to be lower capital licenses, and there's an opportunity to be more fair and equitable in the way that they are granted. So we did something completely unprecedented in the United States, which is that we decided that those two license types would be exclusively offered for the first 2 years to social equity applicants and economic empowerment applicants. So we went through all the details of those programs, but from the applicant point of view, which I think is most relevant to this panel, Those groups will be the only groups to get what's called pre-verification. So what we heard in feedback was that people were having a really hard time getting local approval, getting capital, and finding property. So we moved the application process around so that you can go to the state first and get pre-verified, where parts of your application will be checked, and then you can take that pre-certification and talk to landlords and local officials and investors and be able to have something to show. Then you'll be able to get this exclusive access for 2 years. And a very significant change that we made was in terms of the delivery model, because we heard very loud and clear feedback that people felt that the previous delivery model, which was more like a courier service, as someone said in our hearings, and the phrase really picked up, that it wasn't good enough. And so now, if you are a social equity or economic empowerment applicant, if you have a micro business, you would be able to deliver directly to consumers. So that means as a micro business, you can cultivate, you can manufacture, and you can deliver directly to consumers. So that's a very brief recap of what happens.
Thanks, Shalane, for that recap of what's happening here in Massachusetts. So, Nyambe, I want to talk to you a little bit about Jamaica.
Yeah.
And understanding your family legacy and the rich social history of cannabis in Jamaica. Can you talk a little bit about how that kind of informs what you see here happening in Massachusetts and your thoughts on how equity is proceeding here in the U.S.?
Right. Many people may not know, but my family's Rasta, and so the history of Rastafari in Jamaica is actually a history of persecution. And so when Rastafari was launched in the 1930s, it was, a counterculture to post-colonialism, and also a fight for justice for disenfranchised Jamaicans within the country. And so now, fast forwarding to kind of where we are now, there's this kind of dichotomy that exists where we see this progress that is happening. We see that I do value what's happening here in Massachusetts with an intent to make sure that there is inclusion and equity, but there still is very much a lot of work to be done, because it's like trickling as to what as to the inclusiveness of Black and brown families. If anyone caught the last panel, Kebra mentioned like the trauma that exists within the communities, and so a lot of my work is looking to kind of reach these people and advocate for these people, but also sharing Jawara's story to let people really have that kind of context as to what damage can look like and how extreme it can be. And in my family's case, I'm the caretaker for Jawara, and so every day I am faced with being reminded of what the war on drugs looks like. And so there's some parts of my work where I feel proud that I'm standing in like a legal state. When my father's song, Legalize It, was written in 1976. And he had another song called Bush Doctor, where he said there'll be no more, ducking and hiding. He said that it will build a better economy. These are his lyrics. So it's kind of, it's definitely been an influence in everything that I do. I actually taught in Boston Public Schools for 10 years and made that choice. I actually was an engineer before that. So made that choice to get into education because my passion is to help uplift my community. And so, transitioning to being the head of my dad's estate wasn't really a transition. It's still the work of that same message that he stood for, as far as equity, equal rights, social justice. So it's kind of at my core.
Well, thank you. It's an amazing legacy, and you're doing an excellent job representing.
Thank you.
So, One of the first things when we think about here in Massachusetts when we're talking about equity is making sure that there's an ownership stake in these new businesses that are coming online. We see how much money is coming in, the tax revenue, you can kind of calculate backwards and see that there's a lot of money flowing into open businesses. And the first part of that is actually getting approved, getting local approval, getting a city or town to say and welcome you with open arms. And in Boston in particular, that has been very, very elusive for folks. And so Kobe, I'd love for you to enlighten us a little bit about some of the challenges that you faced along the way, or any insight that you can give to folks who are really trying to look behind that curtain and see what's happening in Boston. And could you give us some intel, at least from your perspective?
Unfortunately, there's no magic pill. I mean, that's the unfortunate part. What I tell people is that Massachusetts has two tracks when you apply, as I did, and one track is very progressive. It's probably one of the best in the country. It's seamless, it's straightforward, and that's the state part. On the state part, it's no different for me than applying for a passport or a driver's license. There's clear expectations of what you need to do and what the other party on the other side is going to do, and to a certain degree it's seamless. The local municipality on the other hand, from my understanding, there's over 200 different municipalities throughout the state that have adopted recreational marijuana, cannabis, and they all have their own unique application process. Some of them, few of them are transparent, most of them are opaque. You don't necessarily know what you're getting into. Boston, we just happen to be fortunate. I wish I had some sort of recipe that I can give to someone else to say this is the track to follow to try and get to that point of success, but that's not the case. As many people know, we're trying to open a second location in Medford and a third location in Mattapan, and we're still in this nuanced kind of nebulous, infinity circle that's, with no clear-cut answer of what's going to happen, and there's a lot of runaround, and so on the local component, I wish there was a clear-cut answer for every town, and I wish that I could say that there's a recipe, but one of the hardest things that Massachusetts had to do in order to get the law passed was to relinquish local control so that local municipalities had a say in the process, and I think the expectations were different from the people who passed the law. I think that they expected that the local municipalities would work in concert with the state to promote the public policy, the will of the people, but as time has proven, that's not the case. But that isn't an indication that anyone should stop doing what you're doing. That isn't an indication that anyone should give up. If you have a goal, then it's just a matter of doubling down and working harder towards that goal and being somewhat patient. But Boston is a little further ahead of the curve. They have a website. You can apply through the website. Unfortunately, after that, you have to chase down Alexis in the city's office, and I'm sure she probably gets probably 50 emails a day from people looking for updates on their host agreement. But just be diligent about it, and just keep being patient, I guess.
Caroline, can you answer the same question from your viewpoint in Uxbridge?
Yeah. So many of you know I took a very grassroots approach to what I did. As a small business owner, I didn't have a lot of money to hire a big legal firm. I interviewed at a couple great, fantastic firms in Boston, but was quoted $80,000, about $100K to get me through the municipal and the application process. So I took a different approach. I did most of the work myself. I worked diligently to do that, and honestly, I spent about $10K to get me through that entire process. In my opinion, getting your HCA is the most challenging part of the whole entire game. So for me, right, I already had a property leased in Uxbridge, paying on it, and I had to pursue this HCA. And for me, I was the first retailer to approach Uxbridge, so I knew I needed to bring my A game to it. I worked extremely hard to prepare a presentation that was informative and really could communicate not only about who I am, but my story. And I think Uxbridge really supported me in my business efforts and voted unanimously to support my HCA. I think Kobe's exactly right. It's all about staying focused and really paying attention to what you're doing. I tell my husband it's about chipping away at the dream, right? Keep pushing forward.
Just a little bit more
yeah.
on the mic.
What else can I tell you? Yeah. I mean, honestly, every Tuesday night, every Monday night, that's where you found me at Town Hall, Uxbridge.
There we go.
Uxbridge, Town Hall. Yeah, on a hardwood bench. Honestly, anytime adult use marijuana came up, I was present and I had a comment about it. You really have to stay focused and push these municipalities. What else can I tell you? Yeah, for small business owners here tonight, so stay focused, work hard, negotiate fair host agreements to the best of your ability. You're going to need a lawyer to do this. They're very serious agreements, 5-year agreements, so be careful about what you sign and really stand up for what you believe in. For me, I used to invite my friends over and have mock community outreach meetings in my basement. Whatever I had to do to really fine-tune my craft and really be able to express it to a town and a municipality. But it's the most important part of the entire process. And if you can get your municipality and the community around what you're doing, you're just going to sail through that much faster. And for the social equity part and the economic empowerment part, you have to bring it to the attention of your municipality. You know, I think towns are slightly educated on the topic, but the more you can bring to it on that level and really tell them why you're a part of it and why you believe in, and the commission's looking for the support of municipalities, I think it's going to push you that much farther.
Excellent, thank you. So we hear the running theme there is perseverance.
Absolutely.
And I think that is probably the one factor that sets successful people in cannabis apart, being able to go back over and over and over again when it seems like the answer is no or it's time to give up. And not only when you're approaching things from the regulatory standpoint or the municipal standpoint, but also when it comes to financing for your business. In cannabis, capital is one of the most difficult pieces of the whole puzzle. A great idea goes nowhere without the support that it needs to become a reality. So Nyambe, can you talk a little bit more about the capital raising process and a little bit more about your fund and what every entrepreneur in your mind should know when they're entering this cannabis space?
Well, in my capacity as president of PT Capital, the first step was really putting together a good team. You want to make sure that you have a credible and trustworthy team that can kind of cover many skill sets and many backgrounds. So like legal is important, and having, you know, just a team that also has a network of people that they can actually reach out to. You also want to make sure that it's important to that perseverance is, it's that same type of due diligence. Know what your worth is. For even a brand like my father's brand, there's people that will still come in and say, you know, we'll just do a glorified buyout, give you a couple million, and then we'll give you 1% royalty. And you're like, no, no thank you. Because people will assume that, you know, you're ignorant. They will assume, you know, a lot of people want to come in and take everything that you have and own all the intellectual property. So you want to make sure that you're educated enough to know all of the things that are important to you and your brand and your company. And so it does take also knowing what you don't. So reaching out and getting the support of others that are able to support you on that journey to kind of raise capital. For us, it's been a long process because we stick to our guns. You know, I'm just like, nope, you know, you have to show up with something that respects the legacy. And so you want to make sure that you kind of hold true to what you value and know your worth and know your team's worth and be able to convey that on paper. Because a lot of people can talk the talk, but you have to have something that shows every aspect of what you bring to the table as a brand and as a company.
Absolutely, and when it comes down to those numbers, right,
Exactly.
they need to look right, and you need to know what your numbers are and be able to back that up.
Exactly.
Because a lot of people have great ideas, but what investors are looking at are how are they going to get paid.
Yep.
So you have to be able to explain that to them. Colby and Caroline, can you talk a little bit more about funding when it comes to a cannabis retail business, whether that has to do with how you guys thought about valuation or how you guys thought about different types of funding, whether that was equity investment or taking loans?
Sure. So I own 100% of my company, and I am completely self-funded. For me, I took. There we go. My biggest advice is pick projects to scale for actually a project that you can afford and you can execute. For those of you who have been to my store in Uxbridge, it's 500 square feet, literally the whole thing. But that's what a small business owner can afford to get into. That's what I could afford on my own, with my own money. And was able to execute in town, and I was able to do it at a pace that I was comfortable with. It was my game to lose. So that is my recommendation. I see a lot of people reaching out to me who are renting 6,000, 7,000 square foot stores. And when you go through the process, I mean, it could take 10 months up to a year to see a license in the state. So you have to be able to really understand what you're putting in every month. Think about paying a lease for a year. So that's what I really did. It's a completely grassroots approach for me. I designed my store. We painted the walls in it myself. Whatever I could do myself, I did. And that was really my biggest success. But you know, so I didn't have to, because I knew there was no funding. We talked to a couple of banks, we talked to a couple of investors. They wanted huge percentages of my business before I even got off the ground and running. And I just wasn't willing to give it away. So that was really my story. Do as much as you can, as much as you possibly can. Because you know there's very little funding out there. So if you're gonna do a store or you're gonna do a cultivation, really understand what type of money you're looking at and make sure you can actually achieve it. Because when you don't, you're going to get held up in that timeline, right? So just be very well aware of that.
Yeah, totally agree, echo that sentiment. Scale in, you know, everyone has lofty dreams, but everything isn't attainable. But if you start off with something that you can do that's reasonable, and my partner and I, again, we own 100% of our company. Friends, family, beg, borrow, whatever you can do. I fully intend to be in there in the next few weeks, putting up whatever we can in terms of the construction and the renovation, sweat equity. You know, I think that, you know, we were fortunate in Massachusetts where we have the ability to just do retail. And in such, retail doesn't necessarily require as much capital. We found space that had just recently been renovated. So our capital requirements were pretty low. We just connected with a supplier who will give us terms. That was huge for us. All these things just really fell into place, and you know, again, it's about scale. It's about, you know, what you can do, what you can lift, and not getting out over your skis. But I think it's also a function of determination, just, figuring out what you can do and working very hard towards that goal.
Excellent. Well, I'm very impressed for both of you about your ownership status, and I know for us at Ardent, it's always been difficult to raise money, even when you have a product, even when you have revenue coming in. Just this industry in and of itself makes people very skittish, and when they do commit and decide that they want to invest, there are a lot of different opportunities for them to invest in. And so oftentimes you are competing against other more established states, right, that have money coming in or things are moving faster. So I think this advice was really on point when it comes to Massachusetts and being able to try to make a little go a very long way. Shalene, could you give us your thoughts on, in your mind, what would make kind of a preeminent or perfect equity program in your mind? What would you like to see happen here in Mass?
I'm going to bring up a state that I think is a model, and I bet it's going to surprise a lot of people. Oklahoma, actually. So the reason why Oklahoma is so relevant is that if you look at the approach that we've taken in Massachusetts, we started out with a skeletal model that's fee waivers, technical assistance, and then we built on it by taking all of the barriers that we're hearing that people are facing and trying to address them one by one. So I mentioned earlier the pre-verification. There's also the long process, that the length of the process is really hard for people, especially if you're paying rent. So at our last meeting, we adopted an expedition policy where if you are from these certain groups that are underrepresented, your approval will now be expedited. So we're chipping away all these different ways at the barriers, and there will be more barriers, and we'll keep addressing them. And every meeting, we will keep showing those statistics, and we'll keep trying until the statistics get better. So that's our model in Massachusetts. Oklahoma, on the other hand, doesn't have those barriers. They just started out with a totally fair system that I think is really like any other business. And it doesn't have a lot of these fear-based, unnecessary, if there aren't 5 cameras pointed at that one plant, everybody's gonna die, kind of attitude. And I think ideally, and I really hope that we see this maybe in other states or here one day, if you have that kind of system to start with, and then you add an equity program on top of that, then we could really see a pathway.
Kobe, can you talk a little bit about some of the things that surprised you the most during the licensing approval process?
Surprises. It has to be somewhere in that political sphere. I just found it surprising how egregious some of the political sidetracking was. Just understanding politics and understanding both sides of the ledger in terms of blue and red and our current administration and how egregious some of that stuff is in Washington. I was just surprised at how public policy wasn't upheld by the local municipalities and how that whole track went off the rails or is currently off the rails. My expectation is that, I was excited when Councilor Presley and Shalene Title, you weren't just this one here, when they were writing the ballot measure, I was excited about all the language in there that spoke to equity. And then when the law was passed, I was super excited. And then to see the product of that, on the local side, trying to get in touch with the mayor and they wouldn't take your phone call and, seeing in the press about the shenanigans that were happening in other cities and towns. My expectation is that public policy is public policy, and as a voter, I wasn't happy as a voter because I voted for equity for everyone, and there were a lot of people in Massachusetts that voted for that same component, And to see that not happen, and to see mayors kind of not care about it as a voter, I was very surprised that, you know, that happens no matter what political party you belong to.
Can I say something on that? So I think we actually have an unprecedented opportunity right now at the local level. So first of all, if you haven't seen it, go to masscannabiscontrol.com, click on guidance, and click on guidance for municipal equity. And that gives you all the tools and information that you need if you want to go talk to your local official about what they should do to make the local process more fair. So I've been complaining about host community agreements and how unfair the local process is for like a year and a half now. And I told anybody who would listen. I called the Attorney General. She was nice enough to meet with me personally. She was really generous with her time. We talked about how we don't want to see the whole industry exploited by big companies. I told the governor's office. I told the Inspector General, which is in charge of trying to stop corruption among local officials. I told the press. I started abstaining from final license votes, like in protest of how unfair these agreements are. I told legislators, to their credit, they held a hearing a couple of months ago on this issue, but it was all moving very, very slowly, and it was unclear like how this issue would ever be addressed. And lo and behold, last week I was in London, and I happened to actually be telling a bunch of people from different countries, if you legalize marijuana, make sure that your city level isn't corrupt. I was like actually talking about this, and I get this alert that federal prosecutors are now talking about this issue because of a corruption and bribery case. And it's funny because that was the one person that I did not talk to, right? Because if you're a marijuana regulator, who are you terrified of? You're terrified of the U.S. attorney who could just shut down the whole industry, you know, at any time. So it's never something that I foresaw. But once that case happened and it was very clear there's a problem at the local level, then every single party that I just mentioned is now out there saying like, oh wow, this is such a big problem. This has to be addressed. And I've gotten so many calls from local officials too this week that are now worried about if their process is subject to the same, is ripe for corruption in the same way. So right now, I would say is the best time if you're a business or a citizen to call your local officials again and say, how do I know that this isn't happening in my city or town? And they may take you very seriously for the first time.
So once you have the honor and pleasure of getting approved and getting open, another really important thing is to stay open and stay compliant. And as many of you may have heard, there have been a lot of fines going around from the Cannabis Control Commission, the Enforcement Division, for various activity from different marijuana establishments. And compliance is the #1 priority once your business is open. So Caroline, can you talk a little bit more about compliance and maybe some compliance challenges that you might anticipate some of these new businesses encountering along the way?
Sure. So my store is running well in Uxbridge, and I'm very proud of it, but I bust my ass every single day to ensure the success of it at the same time. I don't know if they're, when you say compliance issue, but challenges, especially for somebody going through it, are the advertising restrictions for me. I think I have a really hard time. How do you build a brand if you can't advertise it, right? And if you're trying to compete against big business out there, and you're just a little mom and pop shop, so advertising restrictions in that compliance world is my biggest challenge right now. I have customers coming in who just want to buy a T-shirt or want to buy a sticker that says Caroline's Cannabis, be kind. So I think the marketing and the advertising challenges are one of the biggest compliance issues right now in the state. I mean, you go down 24, you're going to see a billboard for a marijuana company. But in my little store, I can't do the simplest of marketing things. So for me, that's my biggest compliance challenge right now for me.
Yeah. That's a tough one, and it's something that we hear a lot, this concern about the advertising rules and how nebulous they are, and how some of these large companies can do, major sponsorships that get them in front of millions of eyes, but it's very difficult for anybody to just, get a steady stream of customers into their shop.
Exactly.
I'd like to talk a little bit now about what you think the local cannabis community can do to support economic empowerment and social equity applicants in sustaining and starting business opportunities. And Naomi, I'm going to let you start.
I think that it's very important to stay on the front lines, a lot of times it's going to all of the CCC hearings, it's, reading through the legislation and understanding the regulations that have changed, and really having those opportunities that allow for people to kind of be involved. I think that, at every point, everyone has to kind of be, an advocate, and then, and really show up when the information is there, because things are moving really, really, really fast, and it's really hard to keep up. And so having an ear on the street and having maybe some supports around that, so that you can show up and learn what changes are happening, so that you can be abreast of everything that is happening. I think that literally it's week to week, letting your voice be heard as well.
Thank you. And Colby and Caroline too, when you're answering this question, it can also kind of blend in what the commission could do to help your business and other small business economic empowerment applicants as well.
So I think the more education and awareness we can bring to the municipal level, the stronger it's going to be. And that's coming from your cannabis community. Even if you're not somebody there to get a host agreement themselves, having the people in your cannabis community show up and represent and be a part of what you're doing, I think it really pushes the whole thing forward. Because the fact of the matter is, when cities and towns drag their feet, it affects everybody. So yeah, and in terms of how can the commission help me? So I think the commission's doing a great job. For somebody who's been through the entire process, I have nothing but positive things to say about the commission. I think we need more cultivators, micro businesses, co-ops, product manufacturers, which in return is going to provide a stronger wholesale market and provide more product diversification in our retail stores. So that's where it steps for me. So I recently just signed a host agreement in Hopedale, Massachusetts last Monday, which I'm extremely proud of, and I think it's an extremely fair host agreement at the same time. So I'm going to move forward with that process, and as a social equity participant, I'm hoping that my application gets fast-tracked. It won't be a 10, 11-month process, and hopefully I keep my fingers crossed, that's what happens. So that's what I'm hoping.
So I would just echo the sentiment that's already been expressed, that in defining where the chokehold is in the process, which is in the local municipalities, what it's identified is who we need to contact to try and ease some of the restrictions. And clearly it's about the local mayors and town halls, and with that, you know exactly who to reach out to. So, it's incumbent upon both sides of the table, whether it be the businesses or the consumers. If you want to see an expanded market and more opportunity, then reach out to your local mayor, city councilor, or town manager and ask the question, You know, what is the agenda for social equity and economic empowerment and parity in this town? I think the commission is doing a stand-up job. There's very little that I would change. I think that they are pivoting as things change in the landscape and being very reactionary to the needs of everyone involved. Definitely would like to see some relaxed regulations around the marketing, because that's always a big issue for us as well. But I think that the commission is also hamstrung by the local municipalities, because there is a logjam of equity applicants, of small businesses, of co-ops, of everything that we need to keep a balanced industry, but they are having a hard time getting through the local municipal process.
So I think that we have just a few minutes for some Q&A. So I will enter the audience now, and if anybody has a question, I'll come your way. I'll be right back. Yes.
Hi, my name is Chandra. I know a lot of you over there, so I just wanted to say hi and to ask about the municipal contract, the municipal process. I've been working with Cambridge to try to set up an office of cannabis so we can get at least a clear picture of what the cities should actually be doing. What would be, Shalene, what would be your ideal relationship with the city if you could have one?
You mean I'm sorry, could you clarify that?
What would be, basically, what would be your ideal, what do you think the ideal relationship between the cannabis industry and the city should be, and how much would the commission itself step in to actually help support an office of cannabis being formed in Cambridge?
Cambridge is an interesting one because I think they might be voting right now. I mean, I would just like to see, it's actually very straightforward what I would like to see. One is just the law as it's already written, which is very clear to be enforced, which put limits on the host community agreement and basically says that you can't, sell the local license to the highest bidder. I'd like to see that enforced. And then I would just like to see cities and towns subject to the same mandates that the state is, and let them figure out, just like we're doing, how do you get diverse and inclusive industry. But it is really great to see Cambridge and Somerville and Boston and East Hampton and a whole list of cities being proactive about it.
Thank you. Great panel. One of the best I've seen in a long time, especially for social equity. So thank you for all being here. To Ms. McIntosh, the question was posed a little bit earlier on about how you saw your work with cannabis and perhaps also social equity playing into what's happening in Jamaica. And as of a week or 10 days ago, they perhaps started discussions to build a legalized export and import market, specifically stated in the case of helping the small farmers, the Rastas, and even medium-sized brands actually survive in a place that is, by its nature, a small island nation. Could you speak a little bit more about what you may have already done or what you might be doing in the future to be involved in the Jamaican market, or to increase the decades-long connection that Boston has with Jamaica?
My experience thus far with the Jamaican community is that it's been very, very political, probably even more so than the States. And so just like, when we see certain regulations pass, it's the kind of how things play out is what is most important. There's been lots of corruption already thus far within the industry, and there still is the disparities between major businesses and then the organic Rastafari community that is trying to grow, and so their access to the market has definitely been very, very difficult. They do have what's called a sacramental license, which is something that I'm looking to kind of make be also something international, but there's still lots of corruption. So as far as getting into the industry in Jamaica and having and doing some sort of advocacy around inclusion, I think what's challenging within the community, the same challenges that are here. You have people that are farmers at the core. You know, they're not necessarily businessmen and women. They're not marketing people. They're not lawyers. And so there's this huge gap that exists between, you know, growing and selling and then having, you know, entering into a cannabis industry. And so ultimately with the legacy that I carry, it's looking for ways to have inclusion, but there's those same barriers that exist, the same, you know, a deep level of corruption that also exists in Jamaica. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And so I hope to kind of merge sort of that professional aspect of the industry and then have these opportunities for inclusion, but it's definitely challenging. And so anyone has worked with even local farmers here. I know people that are doing co-ops and stuff and really trying to get them to a professional level can be a challenge within itself. And so as far as the brand, really just looking to build relationships and trust first so that inclusion can be something that actually manifests and not just in theory.
Hi, my name is William Hyde. To follow up on what Caroline said about waiting for 5-11 months as a social equity applicant, I just want to know what type of advice would you give to someone who has passed the local municipality process and is waiting from the CCC for a license as a social equity applicant?
You're waiting for a license as a social equity applicant, or are you waiting for a license for your business?
Yeah, for the business.
For your business. So when I went to the first social equity introductory meeting, they were talking about how it's 5 to 6 months for your application for like a first review of your application, right? And then so for you, I would say poke the bear. Keep calling. Keep following up with an email, do whatever you have to do. Sometimes I think just having your voice, making a phone call, talking to the investigators over there or the license department just to let them know that, you know, I'm waiting, here I am, just following up. Sometimes that honestly can go a long way.
Thank you.
Any other questions back here?
It's further to Caroline's comment before about the advertising being something that's hindering smaller independent businesses from competing with bigger companies. I'd be curious to know from the other perspectives, what's the one thing that might be missing beyond advertising as a obstacle, or maybe exists but needs further support that small businesses can kind of work together, whether it's some kind of a co-op, as Desmond's mentioned before in a conversation we had, or some organization where we kind of can have a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing going on, where we're working and supporting each other and not to get a leg up on the larger companies. Is there something that's missing that is needed? Is there something more that needs to be supported that's already out there?
Take that. I think it would be really valuable from my perspective if there was like a democratically organized group of social equity or economic empowerment, or both, or any of these groups. If you were, because like for example, the medical dispensaries are very organized. They have their own trade associations. They decide among themselves. They come in with, you know, the 3 to 5 things that they want. You know, the patients are very organized as well. So if we had applicants that decided as a group what they wanted and then presented it, we would take that really seriously, I think.
It's a great idea.
It is a great idea.
I think that I think the hard part, twofold. One is that, you know, as a new entrant to the industry, it's just been overwhelming with the amount of support that exists within the community. It's a small knit community and everyone is very supportive, so I was surprised to that degree. So there is some sort of informal support structure there. On the social equity side, one of the things that I battle with is that, you know, for social equity, for economic empowerment, for equity in general, we had the biggest lobbyist group in the state, which were the voters who voted for this bill. And from there, they had the biggest, you know, voice for rolling out this program. And unfortunately, you know, politicians of all sizes declined to embrace public policy. So when you see that that doesn't work, it becomes a little more of a challenge to come together as a smaller group of, you know, the few hundred, you know, the 120s odd economic empowerment applicants. You know, as Commissioner Title said, even myself, I felt like, you know, I think the term is yelling at the moon, where, you know, you're shaking your fist and you're like, this isn't fair, and someone should take note of it. And reaching out to politicians and having no one respond, you know, it's daunting. And so yes, there should be a group that exists out there, but it's hard when you have these, you know, political forces and all this money that's working to undermine your effort.
Can I weigh in on the marketing thing real quick? Because a lot of people did not pick up on this, but actually at the last meeting, Commissioner Flanagan, who is the public health expert, whom we generally all tend to defer to as a starting point, she actually said that she did support, based on public comment, that licensees should be able to have things like t-shirts and mugs. And for procedural reasons, it was beyond the scope, so it'll be in the next set of regulations.
Woo.
But I think it's
This is actually just a little bit of a piggyback back to actually Kobe and to the other business owners, Caroline. What is the role of, I mean, obviously since the 2016 election and a lot of other kind of things that have happened, activism and kind of the take to the streets model has popped up in a lot of different ways throughout Massachusetts for many different issues. So I'm wondering, what has the role, if any, of the activist community, the risk resistance community, however you want to define it, in Massachusetts played a role, or could it possibly play a role in terms of helping support, especially, you know, when you're talking about municipalities or local officials not really following through with the letter of the law, or having this kind of resistance in and of themselves. So just a little bit of thoughts on maybe how that's played a role or how it should.
For me, myself, I'm most thankful for the press. As these issues come to light, then it gains more traction. And I think that from the standpoint of the individual who is supporting of this idea, of this movement, I think that sharing on social media is powerful, because as those items get liked and shared, then they rise in visibility, and then at some point they become viral, and then more eyes are on it. So I am a big supporter of, if you're not calling your mayor or your city councilor to identify articles and share articles, because again, I think the word is virality, that viralness of that article gets more eyes on it.
I think it's interesting over these last couple of years to see the change and movement, and also the importance of every aspect. From the people that are just on the ground activists that have no business intention whatsoever, to people who are actually business owners who are advocating for what they want, to then people who are actually part of the rulemaking and process, and that you need all of those different pieces, and that there are different messages, but they also come together to provide the right kind of pressure to make the change. So I think we should give one last question.
Hello, everybody. I just have a question for Kobe and Caroline. For the community, for Caroline, what did you do, or what have you been doing for the community? And for Kobe, what do you plan on doing for the community when you're all up and running?
You want to go first?
I'll go first.
Yeah. What?
No, I think it's an important question, and you know, I think that it's an important question in general, and I think that it's a question that's mandated of me as an applicant, and that's more of Commissioner Title's drive in the regulations, that she wants to make sure that every applicant, every business that gets open, no matter your size, that's the question that you have to answer as an applicant in general. But coming from the inner city, coming from, you know, communities and living all across the city in different, you know, neighborhoods, and you see everything, and you see the people in Boston has a real issue with economic equality. And so it's incumbent upon me as someone who's from Boston to give back on a number of different levels. We just had a meeting with Grove Hall Trust, and that's a small community group that we're going to open in Dorchester. And you know, whether it's a farmer's market or whether it's our incubator, you know, our success is driven by our ties to the community. And I want to sleep at night knowing that we're doing our best job as being a partner in our communities. And so I don't think that there's an end to that answer in terms of what we're going to do. You know, I think there's a starting point, but it's a matter of an ongoing conversation with community groups in terms of what they need. Because we're not here to dictate what the community needs, we're just here to answer the call.
Was the question about what am I doing for my community? Is that what you were asking? Yeah. For me, I'm providing clean and safe marijuana to adults in Uxbridge in the Worcester County area. That's what's really for me. Right? Stores like mine provide safe access, labeling, instructions, all really good stuff. And I think I'm creating a little bit of a tourist destination in Uxbridge, and the town is. From the money they're getting, hopefully they're bettering the town and community itself. So that's what I believe in, what I hope Uxbridge is doing, and what the community is doing. And I've had a really positive relationship with Uxbridge, and I hope that positive relationship has not only been good for the success of my business, but I hope for the success of the entire industry too. So.
Wow, okay, thank you guys. That's a lot to digest. Incredible, really. Thank you all so much for participating. Another round of applause for these guys. I think Lisa wants to come up and say hi. We are going to start our final panel in about 20 minutes before we all get up and run away. Before we get up and run,
Okay. I'll be really quick. For those that have met me, I'm the co-founder of Boston Cannabis Week. My partner Scott and I wanted to build something for the community, for conversation, for engagement. I literally have goosebumps right now. Because the people up here right now and what they're talking about and what all of you are asking is exactly why we did this. So thank you. And I have to say, honestly, like, we have the most amazing sponsors, MCR Labs and PAX. Immediately came on. I have to give it. Where's Sohan? Is he still in here? Sohan was the first person that we said, we want to do this thing. We think it's a good idea. What do you think? And he pretty much looked at it and said, if you don't run with this, I'm going to do it. So, and then after that, we've had incredible support. PAX was the first global brand to come on board and said, yes, we want to do this.
So, and the support we've received from the community is enough to bring me to tears. But this night wouldn't have happened without Kara. She has done more. If I told you the emails, late nights, questions, back and forth, calling me, this one's not getting back to me, what do I do, where do I go? Yeah. But if it wasn't for Elevate and it wasn't for Kara, this event wouldn't be as amazing as it is today. So thank you. On behalf of Scott and myself, you can say that. We're going to talk about vitamin E acetate. You know you want to know what's going on in those parts. Thank you, everybody.
I just want to add one more thing. Get out there and support small cannabis. It's important in this community. The micro businesses need our help. Let's get out there and support everybody.
All right, thank you.
That was great.
We got to take a picture as our panel, I believe.
We do.
31.
There we go, Kara's here.
You're 30, wonderful.
Good.
Happy birthday.
Hey, we need your ideas.
Oh, sorry.
Wait.
Oh.
It's water.
Sorry.
Get your ideas.
Okay. Words. Okay, I'll be serious. Ish.
Did you say password?
Everyone worked on it, and I think that having so many incredible people attend, and they're like beefed up the networking, we have to like redesign and allocate our time moving forward. Really excited about this final panel tonight. Scientists, doctors, and technicians, and people, all people working in cannabis science and extractions, and I want to give one more hip hip hooray. Georgia Honey,
Thank you.
She's back here later on her shout out. But Marian McNabb is a co-founder of C3RN, Cannabis Community Care Research Network, and she is an advocate, a researcher, and has so much really, really good data to tell us what's actually going on. It's really excited to have you on this panel moderating. So if you want to go ahead and tell us about yourself, then you guys can go ahead and get started.
Thank you. Thanks, Kara, and thanks everybody for being here, and thanks for our esteemed panelists. I'm really excited to learn a lot from you all. My name is Dr. Mary McNabb, CEO of Cannabis Community Care and Research Network. We are a startup company based out of Worcester that look at all things science and research. So very excited for our panel tonight, the last panel of the evening. Thanks for hanging out. Our topic is lab and science. So I'm actually going to turn to each one of our panelists and ask them to introduce themselves, their title, where they work, and what interests you the most about cannabis science. So we'll start with Scott.
Thank you, Marian. Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Churchill. I'm Director of Science Operations at MCR Labs. I was originally interested in cannabis science. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry, and a friend of mine, a former colleague, advocate for cannabis, recommended that we get involved in cannabis testing. And at the time, I didn't know much about the subject. I did a little bit of digging, and I thought there was a lot of work that needed to be done, a lot of opportunity for creating better science, and it's been like that since I've been in it. So it's a very exciting field, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. I belong to CDX Analytics, Scott's only competition in the recreational testing market, so it's kind of neat to be chumming here with him. I'm the Chief Science Officer there, and what gets me the most excited about cannabis is taking ideas from outside and bringing them in and actually getting the data to help support directions of those ideas that put them to the road.
Go data.
Go data, yeah.
Yeah, right, go data. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Dameron. I am a retired Marine and research psychologist, and got into it because cannabis saved my life. So being able to effectively, dare I use the word prove in an empirical context, that N=1 and that it works to treat PTSD with a cannabis-based treatment, really propelled my research. And I, furthered it, and that's what my dissertation is based on. And I'm currently the Chief Scientific Officer for Full Spectrum Botanicals, which is a project locally, and it's been really awesome working with them.
Great.
I'm Jordan Joseph. I'm the lead extraction technician at Common Alternative Care, which is based in Tahoe. I'm very passionate about cannabis. I've been involved in cannabis for about 15 years, and 3 years of those have been legal. So let's get it.
Yeah, awesome. So this is amazing. All right, so we have expertise on lab, on extraction technician, and we've also got full suite botanicals, but also psychology research. So we've got a very interesting lineup tonight. I'm going to start with one of the most hottest topics that's going on currently, which our first panel talked a little bit about, which is the current issue around vaping. And really, the reason why I bring this up, and I guess let's preface this a little bit. In Massachusetts, and I think you all are developing some of the leading testing technologies in the nation, right, around any kind of cannabis lab testing and now hemp testing. And we also have extraction expertise on the panel. So really understanding what are the products that are going into these, into a regulated and a licensed environment, right? So really one of the best states. However, today, or actually last week, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health is issuing warnings about some issues around this. So I'd like to maybe just go down the panel and hear kind of your general thoughts about the issue, and maybe some of the work that you're doing kind of around this and in educating our consumer and also our businesses around it.
Okay, well, it was last Thursday, a week before last Thursday, I got a call and someone was asking about whether or not we could test for vitamin E acetate. And I did not understand the nature of the question, and I was like, not currently, no, but I could look into it. And then the following day, there was a lot of news about vitamin E acetate. And so I checked in with some of my colleagues, and we decided to order some standard material. That's material that we could use to develop methodology to test for it. One of the problems that we face as analytical chemists is we don't have the Star Trek tricorders that can just analyze material and tell us what it's composed of. So we have to actually develop methodology for target analytes within a matrix.
Yeah.
And vitamin E acetate is a good example of something that would not be predicted as a component that someone would intentionally add to cannabis products for any good reason. So we face the challenge as analytical chemists to respond to what happens. The alternative for that would be for regulators to issue a limited scope of products that could be used in developing their cannabis products. We could then have a list of targets, a list of matrices, and develop our technologies to meet the needs of those. So I think that there's a lot we don't know about what people are putting in their products, and specifically around what some of the dangers are around vaping. There could be a number of dangers that come together, mixed together, such as like how somebody actually vapes, the hardware that's involved, the product that's going into the vape cartridge, and combinations of all of it. So I think that if we were to, kind of narrow the scope of what could be additive, that would at least give us chemists the ability to develop methodologies to test for those things.
Great, thank you. And to kind of back up this question a little bit, maybe if folks are not familiar, is everybody familiar in the audience with what's happening in the news around vaping? Okay, so we got a pretty familiar audience. All right, just wanted to make sure that some of the common, COPD-like symptoms are coming out.
I'm not familiar. Can you recap what's going on?
Sure, would you like to recap?
Yeah, there have been a lot of, there have been deaths recently correlated with vaping. And the CDC and the FDA's last response to these deaths was not even specific as to whether it was to vaping cannabis or vaping tobacco. So it's something that these deaths haven't been correlated with anything very specific. Vitamin E acetate, I think, is the number one culprit that they're pointing a finger at right now. But like Scott said, there's a lot of work to be done in understanding what's added to these products. Because if there were a list available for each of these products that cause these deaths, there could be a correlation made between a common ingredient, possibly vitamin E acetate. But for now, it's kind of an educated stab in the dark, is what I'm going to call the test for vitamin E acetate. And when we develop a test to quantify it, then what's the acceptable level of vitamin E acetate? And nobody's even thought about that question yet, because the toxicological data that's available is related to ingestion. Inhalation is a whole nother level, and usually, you're more acutely reactive to that method of introduction than you are ingestion. So, like Scott said, it's all about knowing what it is you're putting in your body and correlating those things with the effects.
That's a really good point. And one of the conversations I was having with a colleague yesterday was around, so vitamin E acetate, for those that, and correct me if I'm wrong, because y'all are the experts, is used as one of the cutting agents, right? In creating these different vapes. So one of the other factors, as a public health person, we were trained to look at, okay, well, maybe there's vitamin E concentrate, maybe it's something you're smoking, or maybe it's something that it's actually in and heavy metals potentially leaching out, or maybe, this could be cannabis, or this could be nicotine. But, so back to your point, there's a lot of unknowns, and there's a lot of sleuthing that needs to be done, you know? I'm curious really about the heavy metals and that level of, vaping and when heating elements, how do you think that interacts?
I'll give the mic to you after this, I think. But there's a really good review article, peer-reviewed article on e-cigarettes. And it's going over, the 30-plus publications that have looked at the vapor coming out of e-cigarettes. And they do have studies on heavy metals and a lot of other contaminants that they would expect to come from those products. And they did find that, the more weird stuff you put in there, like flavorants and those types of new things, that's where you start to see the issues. And yeah, I would highly encourage you to look for that review article that's peer-reviewed. It's published in 2014, I think, yeah.
Okay, so not being a chemist by trade, but in understanding that some of the reactions, that you have with some of the excipients or cutting agents, you have propylene glycol and you have polyethylene glycol. And if the combustion cycle isn't finished, then you have formaldehyde. Well, is that a device issue? Is it a vaping device issue that is failing to heat it properly to that full cycle? Or is it that it's an inappropriate cutting agent for what we're using it for? Or, or maybe this is a question, maybe it's an all-around question, but I understand the problem, I don't understand why we've gotten to this point. Maybe, I don't know.
Giordani?
I honestly can't quite add on any more to anything Scott, Brianna, and Elizabeth just said, outside of making sure you guys are reading what is being put into your cold press packages. If it's being cut with anything, whether it's vitamin E, MCT oil, or if any terpenes have been added into it, I would suggest you guys try to get the purest product out there, just sole cold pressed oil with no additives whatsoever.
Yeah,
it's good
advice. And it draws to the point that a lot of this news and this press media is around some very important cases, and fatalities, but a limited number. And so still a need for really understanding that this isn't a population level problem at this point, and really understanding where we're looking to, where are these agents, so further science or looking into, what other more safe ways or cutting agents should be used. Did you want to add a little bit more, Scott, on that?
Only that, as far as formaldehyde specifically, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about in terms of that. I've heard of formaldehyde in various vapor and combustion end products. And, depending on what you put in there is the baseline for what could potentially come out of there. And with vaporizers, you would expect it to be less than combustion, because combustion is well characterized as creating hundreds, if not thousands, of byproducts. Some of them pretty horrific, but usually in small amounts. But combustion is incomplete combustion, to be specific, is what creates the cocktail of very hazardous things associated with smoking. Whereas with vapor, vapor has less information. So we don't know what combination of conditions, whether it's the hardware, the starting material, or the approach to vaping. So some people might vape too hot, some people might not vape hot enough. So it's a very complex mixture, and it's very uncharacterized as compared to combustion products like smoking.
I appreciate that, thank you, because my specific interest is in using the inhalation method, you know, when you're treating mental health specifically, and if there is an issue with methods like that, you know, okay, well, how can, you know, then what is our next best option type thing, you know? So I appreciate, you know, that knowledge, because that's not, you know, that kind of background is not my forte, so, but it kind of,
and treating, you know, conditions
yeah.
such as PTSD and others, you want to have, you know, a consistent and sustainable product, you know, that, you know, would be as risk-free as possible. Which kind of leads me into the idea of product formulation, stability, shelf life. And I think all of you all can kind of speak to this. You know, just sort of what are the, you know, what are those key areas of, you know, but within extraction and lab and even a clinical experience, you know, what are the important factors around product stability and stability?
So this has been something that I've been concerned with for a long time is if I went to the store tonight and I picked up a loaf of bread and I brought it to the lab and I did a yeast mold test on it, and then 2 months later brought the same loaf back and did the yeast mold test on it, how many people here think I would get the exact same number? Does anybody? So usually after a month or so, I'm throwing my bread away. I don't need the equipment to determine
it's already green.
the counts. It's bad. And one of the things we don't have in the cannabis industry right now is any kind of shelf stability to see when we are growing things or when things are degrading. So potency profiles could be changing, whether it's terpenes or cannabinoids. Microbiological issues could be happening, and a number of other things. So we talk about the formulations. That is the inactive ingredients that we put into it, whether we're making a cookie or a vape cart, we're putting inactive ingredients with active ingredients. And we're not even looking at what those inactive ingredients are at this stage. That's one of the things we brought up as a concern. And the second thing is we're not looking at the safety and shelf life stability of those in the presence of the actives and the actives in the presence of the inactives over time. I think that's an important thing that needs to be addressed going forward.
Yeah, you know, in terms of one of the or several of the active ingredients that we do know about, their degradation profiles have started to be monitored. There's a 2019 publication on degradation of THCA and CBDA in cannabis inflorescence, where they've stored it in different environments and monitored it over time. And it's brilliant. Actually, a member of Apothecare sent that paper to me. But it does go a level deeper. You know, we're mixing these cannabinoids with chocolate and a ton of different things that could either stabilize the cannabinoids or destabilize them. And then those ingredients themselves have their own, you know, process and degradation that needs to be monitored. So, you know, looking at this, and you can tell that both MCR and CDX are working to understand the formulation of these cannabis products and these cannabis-infused products. And that's really going to add a whole nother layer of safety to the industry. So something to look forward to. No, I keep thinking I'm going to pass this.
I know, it's like, it's odd, because he's got his end in mind, you know. Okay.
Stability.
Yeah. So in terms of, well, let's ask Giordani because he's.
I was like, I don't
move on. So in terms of product, and you're an extraction and technician assistant at our lead at Commonwealth Alternative Care. So in terms of product sustainability and stability, what do you think are the most important factors from an extraction perspective, and how different from that, you know, would that be? Is that, you know, from a product, from an extractable product to then infusion almost, what level, you know, is that a different product sustainability and, you know, testing? What are your thoughts?
For me personally, I feel like we should get the products out as soon as they're tested. Like Scott mentioned, he can test a loaf of bread today and test it next month. He's not gonna get the same results. Picture making your own Italian dressing. You homogenize it, you mix it all up, everything is cool, but the longer you let it settle, the oil starts to separate, and that just transfers to everything else. So I feel like we need to get the products out ASAP as compared to them sitting, waiting to be sold wholesale or sold to consumers in the stores. What was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
Well, no, I mean, okay, and I agree with that. So, okay, say an extraction. All of the different types of extraction, even in terms of product stability. So you've got waxes, shatters, I mean, all different types of different extractions and ways that you consume it. And I'm curious, because I'm not an expert in this, does that product, stability and formulation, even across those, if it's the same strain and produced in different ways, is that even different? Does that test differently? Like if you have a same, I don't know, whatever strain, you get what I'm saying. You get my question, right?
Yeah.
If I turn it into a wax, a shatter, a this, a that, is it all just gonna be tested differently, or how does that work?
They have a shelf life, I believe, of 1 year from the year it's been tested to the year it needs to go out. But like I previously mentioned, the longer they sit in a corner, things are gonna start to separate and settle. I've seen it firsthand with live resin and shatter. It's just, I can't describe it to you.
Yeah.
We need to get them in and out like hot potatoes.
Yeah. And so would, go ahead.
Hey, there we go.
There you go.
So I work for a neurology group, so our patients we certify there. So when they go to these facilities, are they educating them on the shelf life? Because I've never had any of these conversations or had any of these patients.
That's actually a really good question. So the question was, is anybody ever educated as a patient on the shelf life, which also leads into labeling?
That's a great question. You should ask your associate at the dispensaries. I know for us, on the back of the labels, we have the shelf lives and everything on the nutrition and the POS labels. We have the date it was created, the date it was tested, and the date of the expired shelf life.
Yeah.
But just as the providers, it's we certify and then it's kind of, we send them off. But if there's any issues or anything, they come back to us.
Correct.
And determining where these symptoms came from, we're unclear of what's going on. So for providers, for educating my staff more, what would you suggest? I brought 2 other companies to our office, but what do we need to do as providers to educate them to a higher level so they are more aware of what's going on in this industry?
I would be in more contact with the extractors or your lab director who approved the order and go from there. Or just even open up a.
Certify the patients, and then we say, okay,
Right.
go away, you can go.
Right.
We're just doctors.
Yep.
That's all we do, and then we send them off to this world.
Honestly, to wash your hands, I would try to establish a line of communication between the storefront and the consumer themselves.
Moreover than washing your hands, I'm not dismissing it.
That's okay.
But I know what you're saying. So a big portion of it, a huge portion of it that we're really missing across the board, and it doesn't matter what state you're in, what status you're in, is education. It takes an immense amount of research and knowledge to understand what the endocannabinoid system is, where the gap in medical data has been, then where the gap has been socioeconomically for the last, 100 years, right? We'll stop there for now, right? But then also where we are in testing and in standards, and it is different. We're not growing hemp from our founding fathers anymore. We're actually treating diagnoses, and you're looking at consistency, and unfortunately we have to abide by these standards in which we've created. So it's bigger than Medicare and stuff like that, but you still have to have all this data and all of this education and bring all these people together and understand that we are treating, we are really, this is a healthcare thing, this is a medicine thing, this is an empowerment type thing, and then you get into legislative efforts. So, bring it back to a small scale is in having somebody who knows what they're doing, who have somebody who is a source of knowledge or can at least point you in the right direction. And then, it's kind of like ancient Chinese secret, right? You know, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and then you build a network of providers with valid credentials, you know, with people who are trusted in their community, who, this is empirical data, you know, this is not my agenda, this is not this party or that party, this is what the science says, you know, and this is the way that we should approach it, you know, to really make this a thing. You know, outside of that, what are we doing, right?
And speaking of, what is your favorite research topic? And tell us a little bit more about your studies and your work in New Orleans.
Okay, so I am in New Orleans currently, and it's fantastic. Come visit. My area of expertise is in post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. And, you know, there is a personal passion mission, you know, just because when I retired from the Marine Corps, this is my world, you know, and, but it doesn't have to be debilitating. You know, I mean, it can be post-traumatic growth. And so in knowing how to approach that even takes that knowledge base, but also taking in a holistic picture of what you're dealing with. You need to understand med lists, you need to understand comorbidity, you need to understand things like that. So I started talking to my fellow veterans. You know, after going through what I went through and tracking my own data and realizing, wow, this is a thing, I wanted to help. I mean, these are my friends. I don't want to get phone calls anymore saying, hey, so-and-so shot himself, you know, and I'm like, damn, these are my Marines, you know, these are my friends, these are my family. And nobody should have to suffer like that. And it doesn't have to be veterans, it's anybody in any sort of trauma. It doesn't have to be like that. So let's fix it. So in starting to capture this data and in understanding that when I paid attention to environmental factors, when I paid attention to different anthropological factors, different medical factors, different pharmaceutical factors, you can start to take in a holistic picture of what is going on and dial in strains and dial in different things and actually truly affect permanent positive change. So that's what I'm working on.
Yeah.
That's my
and
research.
I'm really grateful for that.
So I did some research in the VA down there, and that's kind of springboarded me into what I'm doing now.
Awesome. Yes, and
thank you
for your work.
listening.
Well, no, thank you for your work and your leadership. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really important, especially for particular conditions. I think you're absolutely correct. What we're finding is cannabis is very personalized medicine, right? So everybody on this panel knows how complex, and everybody in this room is now learning how complex cannabis is, right? So what cannabinoid profiles you have, how you're consuming it, if it's vape, if it's flower, and then how you're dialing that in. From Jordani's perspective, what interests you most when you do your job or creating formulations, or what do you think the market should be looking towards for the extractions in the future? What should we look for?
Honestly, what interests me most is the fact that I can go to work and play with weed all day long without worrying about the cops or feds kicking in my door.
Amen.
That's awesome, right?
Also the various type of extractions we do, whether it's ethanol extraction. My personal favorite extraction is CO2 extraction, primarily because it uses CO2 gas. And in this machine, we'll flood the gas into a chamber where we agitate it with sub-zero temperatures and with enough pressure, turning that gas into a fluid. Once it's in that fluid state, we'll reheat it and pressurize it again, making that gas, that solvent, supercritical. When it's supercritical, it can pass through the biomass, your cannabis, extremely easy, and pull and extract everything off of it before it runs into these separation filters where it'll capture your terpenes and mixed fractions. Terpenes are your smells and taste, and they're in everything. I can give you sour diesel if it was blueberry, and if you know what sour smells like, you're gonna call me off of my shit just like that. Excuse my French, I'm sorry. And your mixed fractions have all your cannabinoids, your waters, your waxes, your fats, which we further separate and refine. And the last step in that is taking that fluid, sending it back to a reserve tank, agitating it again with temperatures and pressures until the gas stabilizes, turning back into a fluid. So that extraction is personally my favorite. And I feel like I veered off topic with the
That was
question.
great.
No,
That
it's
was
awesome.
like you did like almost go through every extraction technique. That was awesome.
Yeah, so that's personally one of my favorite things about my job, outside of just being able to just walk into the vault and just see totes of like hundreds of pounds of sour diesel, and just asking my boss if I can just take some home. But that's a no-go every single time.
That's great. And from the lab perspective, taking all of those amazing products that are produced, are there different techniques between a concentrate and flour, and just give us like a high and a deeper version of how that's sort of tested.
Yes, but I've been going first all the time, so I'm going to give it to Brianna to start.
Oh, you would too. So, before I get into
Chivalry
this,
is not dead.
yeah, right? It's like that. The Association of Cannabis Specialists. I'm not sure if either of you are involved with that, but Dr. Jordan Tischler is getting a bunch of MDs, the kind of doctors that help people, together to try to coordinate the labs and the dispensaries, and they put together webinars where they can send their patients to learn about reading labels, or maybe talk to MDs about what to look for in labels, and actually recommend particular dispensaries for their patients so that they're more aware of what to expect. ACS, Association of Cannabis Specialists. Testing cannabis in all of its fun forms. So the protocol for testing and sampling cannabis has a pretty good description of this in Exhibit 8, and it's actually in a flow chart. So we test for pesticides at the flower stage and only the flower stage. So if you buy a package of gummies, there has to be a test certificate somewhere from the flower that was used to create the extract that was used to infuse that gummy, showing it was safe from pesticides, down to 10 ppb. At intermediate levels, so if you're dealing with extracts or something that you're going to add into some other product, then you have to test for solvents and metals at that stage. And finally, any product that's on the shelf as that stage, it's the finished product, has to be tested for microbials, mycotoxins, and potency, always. And so there's a pretty confusing method in showing people when to test what and for what reasons. But even with cannabis-infused products, I think we can both agree there's a different extraction method that's optimal for each formulation to get the cannabinoids out and measure them. So yeah, the different products require different testing, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree with everything she said. So there are different tests that are required for different products, and each different product has its own, whether it's sample weight, extraction solvent amount, extraction mechanical or physical or chemical or heat or what have you approach, and then there's potentially cleanup and dilution. So it gets pretty complicated. I think if we all want to run down to the lab right now, I can probably not show you. But to answer your question in brief,
Darn.
each target, each matrix, they all have their own approach to getting the accurate result. Matrix dependent, target dependent.
Yeah, cool. So one of the issues, or one of the things I'm excited about in Massachusetts and Go Massachusetts, is that we have home grow. Yay. So we have the ability to grow our own cannabis amount. Woo! He knows. It's really exciting, and there's a lot of novices, and there's probably also a lot of experts that are out there in the garden, in their own home.
Yeah.
And no offense to you all, I love you all, at the labs, but it can be quite costly with all of those labs that you just spoke about from start to finish. But we also want to make sure that, I'm curious, I guess let me just jump to the chase. I'm curious about home testing for cannabis and cannabinoid profiles and where the state of that science is. I can see myself as a home grower maybe wanting to grow a high CBD strain, and then when I may want to extract it at home, am I going to have to go through that, or can I, you know, what can I do as a home person?
So there are a number of products that we have seen over the past 6 years that are designed for home grows, and they weren't necessarily very accurate or have a diversity of target analytes that they could measure, but in some cases they were able to differentiate between high CBD and high THC to some extent. Now, we didn't fully characterize it. We just had somebody who asked us if we could do a side-by-side comparison sometime in the last 6 years, and you know, the results weren't, you know, spectacular, but they weren't horrific. So there is that, but during that time, I'm certain that better products have come along, and I would suggest that it's more likely that there would be in the future some kind of IR-based technology that was like in kiosks that were located at like grow stores or where have you, where cannabis cultivators, home growers might find themselves typically frequenting, that might have an even better approximation that would match the test results that we get from our highly developed methods and technologies.
Cool. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, you know, there are a lot of products that have come out in the last few years for home grows, little boxes that they can use to measure the cannabinoid content and possibly some contaminants at home. And that's one of the most fun things that we do at CDX is we always bring them in and put them up alongside the gold standard testing equipment and methodology. And you know, you can make relative measurements, like you could say this is more potent than that, but in terms of actually quantifying accurately, there's a little bit of room for, there's a lot of room for improvement there. But I say, you know, pick up the phone and call your testing lab and see what they'll do for you. I think it's important that testing labs participate in that space and take people seriously in a one-to-one type way. So I don't think that the cost should completely deter you, but I do think it's at least worth exploring getting your products tested at least one time to give you a baseline with a testing lab.
Awesome. And Giordani, from an extraction perspective, what would be one piece of home advice for a home extractions that you might give?
Don't do it. A lot of the solvents are highly combustible, and if you don't know what you're doing, specifically if you're blasting with BHO, blasting, I just call that extracting, I just call it blasting. If you're gonna blast with BHO at your house, the slightest static electricity or your phone going off or just the slightest interference, even if you have a gas leak that's minor, could blow your whole garage up. I would not do it if you weren't trained at it.
Go ahead, Karen.
I have a question.
Great.
Are you getting a lot of products that, how are products testing differently for home growers that are doing like an ice water extraction or fresh rosin versus like the industry coming out with, you know, the solvent extractions? What are like the biggest data differences that you find between those two cohorts?
Interesting.
From what I've seen, the professionals, we'll call them the registered dispensaries, they tend to have higher purity, higher concentration of active, and more deliberate design. So if they're looking for something deliberately, they tend to get the tech there and get it right there. There are a few people, specifically before there were dispensaries, that are probably working in dispensaries now, that were able to develop some very high quality products out there. But the person at home trying to do this, especially if they're using solvents that are flammable or explosive, very dangerous, not recommended. I wouldn't do it. I'm a chemist. Nevertheless, there are people that have varying degrees of success, and what I've seen with the registered dispensary professionals is that they tend to have the time, resources, and support, especially of the laboratories, to test their product until they get it where they want it and then stabilize it, as compared to home growers who seem to be an endless array of people coming in starting from scratch. So for me, it's an unbiased view of beginners versus pros type of thing, with the exception of, like I said, before there were dispensaries, there were a good number of pros out there.
Sure. Yeah, it's, you know, with the home grows, they generally don't have the team and the resources that these registered establishments have, as well as the pool of knowledge from which to draw from so many people that have been in the space. That said, I have seen some really incredible products come through CDX. I'm looking at Brian. And you know, it just depends. I'd say with marijuana establishments that are registered, they're more consistently higher yield and more reproducible. But yeah, we do see the one-off here and there from home grows that are also showing some pretty good potential as well.
I just have one thing to add on to the homegrown. I feel like that has a lot to do with the current issue we have with vaping, because I know at least 6 of my friends who are growing left and right, and they're even extracting at their house. Do they have experience? No, but that's their prerogative, which is why it circles back to making sure you know exactly what's in the product that you're ingesting or consuming.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Wow. And as a public health professional, I'll echo it, which is why it's really important to know labels and know what, you know, labeling and know what's in your product and that it is regulated, tested, and all of those things that we talked about. So, any other questions in the audience? Will?
This one's for Giordani. Is there, from a consumer safety point of view, is there a preferred method of extraction? You mentioned cold pressed oil. Obviously, there's alcohol, there's butane, there's CO2. Is from a consumer perspective, is there anything that's safer than anything else?
Safe-wise, your hash is safe, rosin is safe, cold press is safe. Everything is safe if it's coming from an RMD as long as it's tested, but everything boils down to preference. What works for me may not work for you. I like raw flower and I just like weed in general, so I'll smoke everything and I'll consume it every which way, but not a lot of people would do that. Not a lot of people like to go out in stores smelling like they just rolled out of bed with a pound of weed in their pocket. Me personally, I don't care. But cold press, your edibles, and try to stick to your solid waste extractions like hash and rosin.
I think what he mentioned down here was like a safe extraction process that they can do at home, like pressing, like if you're going to extract at home, what's the safest method to use in your home?
If you're trained and you know what you're doing, you could blast with butane and propane safely. But if you don't know what you're doing, I would stick to just the rosin and making bubble hash at your house.
Bubble hash, that's cool.
For Cameron, so you talked about a holistic program, pharmacology, nutrition, cannabis, and practice. Have you found, so building on the holistic approach to proper treatment that creates, as you said, lasting results and growth. Have you found that any particular delivery method, whether it is a vape pen or a joint, as you mentioned before, or an edible, or perhaps even some kind of specifically targeted sublingual or topical, to be most dependable, most accurate, most precise in terms of managing someone's treatment who needs consistent high doses of any kinds of cannabinoids? Or do you need to have a whole wide range of those delivery methods throughout a day or a week's time?
That's an excellent question. It is kind of a big question, and I'll start with one. It is a very personalized approach. So, for example, mental health and severe neurological conditions, it's imperative that you have an inhalation method. It really is. So that then headbutts against a lot of legislative issues. You know, we faced a lot of that this past session in Louisiana specifically. And even allowing inhalation but having them understand it's the same as having a kid with asthma and then not giving them a rescue inhaler on the playground. I mean, that's inhumane. So now getting into other conditions, gummies work best for some people. Some people, they don't process them as well. You know, some people are treating for different conditions. It does become a personalized approach. And then there are ways to stack it, if you will. So a lot of fellow veterans I see are dealing with physiological pain along with mental health issues. So it's important to find a balance. When you get into precise dosing methods, it's easier to find that balance, but getting to that point where you can get to, now this is what you need to take, that's kind of the rocky process, if you will. So you kind of go through this learning curve, if that makes sense, if you understand me right. So sometimes a sublingual will work. Sometimes a patch works best if you maybe have shoulder surgery. Say that 10 times fast. So to answer your question in so many words, it does depend on what you're treating. It really does. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of snake oil out there. There's a lot of not so great products that people are trying to push because it's easy. It's capitalistic. It's a market. There's a market for it. So it is paying attention to what's in those and then going from there.
I think you make some really excellent points about product availability and regulation. So the other day I was in a dispensary, gratefully doing a fun site visit, and I was watching chocolate and edibles being made. It was awesome. And it smelled really great. I was jealous that was not my day job. But what I realized was that, in that production process of cooking and everything, the regulations required so much more onerous and limiting of medicine. Okay, so in Massachusetts, you can only have 5 milligram edibles, right? And so I'm learning from a cook's perspective and like how you dose that, how you do that. But on the flip side, 2 years ago, I sat in the Public Health Commission meetings and asked questions about why only 5 milligrams, because patients need a lot more than 5 milligrams in many cases, and most people really need a lot more than 5 milligrams. But we ended up with 5 milligrams. And so then I'm watching it 2 years later happen, and we're going medical and recreational market. And so interestingly, I think about patient choice and about ghost extraction or techniques and how we're testing them and these 5 milligrams, how we're dosing this. It's so complex because it's state by state, and it does limit us significantly from a science and a lab perspective. Yeah. Because it's not like we can all collaborate with our colleagues on the other side or other states and be like, hey, because it seems so unique, from each state. I don't know if y'all have any thoughts around that. I just kind of riffed on that, but I think it's so complex from a patient perspective, a lab perspective, a product availability, innovation, and business. It's just, I've never seen anything like this in any healthcare, clinical paradigm, drug development, anything, right?
Yeah, the cart kind of came before the horse here for a good reason, for a lot of good reasons that we've talked about. And so catching up with regulation and testing is something that has to happen, and it is happening at a very quick rate. And actually the dichotomy between testing regulations in states also kind of separates us on a competitive arena as well. So I like to talk to scientists from other states. I like to talk to scientists from Massachusetts too. But you can be really open actually with labs in other states and discussing theories and better ways to do things and options. And I think that is what needs to happen. That collaboration needs to happen to keep up with the regulation. So that's where we're going.
Yeah. Pam?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just have a question going back to the chocolate. Okay. So you go and you buy a chocolate bar, and it has 100 milligrams of THC in it, and it's scored in tens. So each time you break off a piece, how do you really know that you're getting 10 milligrams of THC?
So what we found is that early on, when there were only a few dispensaries, there were certain clients who would give us 100 milligram chocolate bar that had been scored, and sometimes we would get various results that didn't necessarily match up to their expectation. So one of the first things they need to develop is a system for making sure that there's homogeneity. And once they've developed this, they tend to keep it. So I would say that the testing process, while it's not perfect, has gone a long way to improving the quality of the products that are available to consumers, because if you're testing it if you're taking it from a registered dispensary, they go through the testing process and we identify a number of issues prior to it getting to the consumer, and it kind of pushes back to them to get it fixed up before releasing it, if that answers your question.
Kara, did you want to? We have some back there. Go ahead.
I have a question for the lab operators. What sort of collaboration do we see between the operating labs in Massachusetts? And what is it that you're going to agree and disagree on when it comes to providing information to regulatory bodies, and what sort of agendas you would like to see move forward?
That's a really good question.
Should we just put our boxing gloves on?
That's
what she wants.
I know, it's like, that's a loaded question. Wow.
Ooh, I gotta moderate this.
Yeah, just for the record, Kara works for a testing laboratory.
We can bring the function ring down 8 o'clock on the
So if we're being honest, most of our collaboration and common ground is about bitching about regulators and other problems, right, to each other. We don't get into solving a lot of the technical problems, although we do know about some of them, and we do, in all likelihood, tell the regulators who come to us separately many of the same things. When we were under the DPH would have routine meetings. They would bring in lab people, and we would get together, and sometimes there would be differences, right? And other times there would be there'd be common ground. Like we were talking, Brianna was mentioning, it's easier to talk to people out of state that you're not in competition with. But the problem with that is they've got different problems because they have different regulators. Their chocolate might be this, or their test might be that. So it really is counterproductive to have silos in the first place, and a lack of industry standards, which, you know, AOAC, ASTM, USP, ILAC, they're all separately trying to develop their own protocols and testing standards and so forth. And if I end up on the same AOAC panel as Brianna, we will be collaborating on that level, on the national level. And if we could standardize nationally, we would also be able to access researchers from different places that have absolutely no conflict of interest working together and creating together. But I think that more often than not, we probably tell the regulators the same thing separately.
Yeah, and that's a good summary, I guess, of our relationship. And to get into the weeds, like you were requesting a little bit, you know, we do have differences in opinion in terms of microbiological testing methods. That's the elephant in the room. But, you know, really controversy and problems are the biggest drive for innovation.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that we have that.
Yeah.
Because what that's going to do is it's going to fuel these different methods to validate more thoroughly, when really that's all we're both looking for. Something that we agree on that I'm really proud of is, you know, the creating methods that are used all over the U.S. might not necessarily be as great of a goal as creating validation parameters that all the methods have to meet. Because what that does is it allows us to continue optimizing our methods, so we're not stuck to one particular method, but we still have to play within the same bounds to ensure that quality and reproducibility is still present.
Great answer. Yeah.
Very good.
I just want to add to that, I had forgotten, we've talked about this a number of times, that we completely agree that we should be talking about standardized validation procedures, because it is super important to not get bogged down into a prescribed one-size-fits-all test method, because innovation relies on people constantly challenging the boundaries. So I forgot to mention that. Very good point. It's all about continuing innovation.
And we should congratulate these innovative lab leaders, because literally y'all are the innovators in this country. Some of the leaders, so, you know, I mean, I think a lot of groups look to y'all, and I thank the entire panelists of leaders, and, you know, I guess we're about at our time. I appreciate all of you, all of your work.
I was going to say there were questions in
do
the
we
back
have-
before, but
do we have one more time for one more question?
Okay.
We're wrapping up. I apologize
Oh, no.
but thank you all, and thanks everybody for hanging on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for coming and supporting this kickoff event for Boston Cannabis Week. And I hope to see you at all the rest of our events. And I can't wait for more. Thank you for coming, panelists.
Yeah, and happy birthday to Jordana.
Thank you to everyone who's watching on the live stream right now. We hope everyone had a great night tonight. Thank you.
Yes, and happy birthday to Jordana.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Jordani. Happy birthday to you. Yay!
Thank you.
All right.
Come again?
I know,
Thank you very much for doing that.